Hello everyone, and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 139. My name is NBZ. I'm the host of this podcast, apparently. It's a show where we talk about video games and Nintendo and all the things we love about them. And I'm joined by Bally. I don't have any witty thing to say at the start, Bally. This is just a regular intro. I don't know. We're just gonna roll with it.
My arms are hurting from video games.
Well, there you go. There's an exciting thing.
The good old days of going for it in Wii Sports Tennis.
Yeah,
exactly. You wake up the next day like, ow, my shoulder is sore.
God, I remember us waking up so many times, like after sleepovers, and be like, "All right, let's go and play some tennis," and just having a good time. That was
after doing the Everybody Votes channel, because that was the best bit about waking up to a new day.
It's literally my favorite. It's one of my overriding memories of the Wii generation is coming down from a sleepover at your house and down to the kitchen, and the blue light on the Wii is just glowing, and we're like, "Oh shit, what's happened?" And we go inside it, and it's like, "There's a new channel. It's called the Everybody Votes channel, and you can vote on these questions." And it was insane. We loved it. It was the greatest thing that ever happened.
I'd want to get out my Wii and set up some sort of system where every notification on my phone just causes the blue light to glow, because it's that dopamine hit of like, the blue light is glowing, like, there must be something awaits, let's see it. There
was something so like sci-fi and futury about the Wii. It's like it was a very slick design. It just had a coolness about it that blue light was just epitomized. It was perfect. But I
should say my arms are aching from Beat Saber. That's
why
I'm in pain.
Absolutely.
I've not gotten that Wii Sports again.
No. But you are basically at the end point of what Wii Sports began with motion controls, is like VR is kind of where it's come towards. God, Nintendo's doing VR now apparently with Labo and everything, which is an interesting thing.
Look up the bum of a bird.
Yeah, apparently so. I don't know. I mean, it's something that I think I've tried cardboard VR before, which is
what's that like?
It's fine. It's mainly like basically, VR on your phone, and I have a Google Pixel, so it's kind of powerful enough to run VR. So I've tried it out, and it's kind of neat, but it is very low res, and it is kind of motion sick inducing to some degree. So it's not the best thing, but
the only downside is the low res. What's the field of view?
I mean, it works pretty well. Like, it's one of those things you show family members, and they're like, "Oh, wow, this is pretty amazing what you can do here." But it's nowhere close to like what actual VR is like. But it's a neat trick, and I wonder what Nintendo will do with Labo VR. It seems like another part of their... It wasn't really a big celebration or anything. It was like, oh yeah, by the way, here's a tweet, we're doing Labo VR. We don't have any footage of it, what it looks like or anything. I think it comes with a pack with a bunch of other stuff as well. So I don't know how much they're pushing it. It seems like a bit more of a kind of dipping their toe in the water than anything else, and it's not like Nintendo doing full-on VR, so I wouldn't expect people to go crazy about it. But interesting nonetheless. But yeah, not really much to talk about with that, and we're not going to do a new segment for it, because we're talking about lots of other things today on this video game podcast about Nintendo and Nintendo video games. So Bally, do you want to tell the fine folks at home what today's show is going to entail?
2 segments show this time round. First segment, we've got lots of games to talk about that we have been playing, and for the second segment, we're going to talk about our 6th Backlog Club, which is Luigi's Mansion. The original was on the GameCube. We were playing the remake on the 3DS.
Yes,
it came out last year.
It did,
and
indeed.
We've got a lot of things to say about that game.
Yeah, one of those games that you owned back at the GameCube launch, but I think you traded it in, didn't you?
I traded it in for some stupid amount of small amount of money, and that never trade in games, people. That's what I've learned. They are not worth the small amount of satisfaction you have from just looking at it on your shelf, even if you never touch it, is worth the few tuppence that you get in return from a trade-in store.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because some people, like, that's how they fund new game purchases, is with old ones, so I understand it, but also I have never been someone who trades things in. I always keep my stuff partially because of YouTube, and I'm like, maybe I'll make a video on that one day, but also it's a thing where I like to have a catalog, and I like to know I own this thing and that I can play it whenever I want, even if I never play it again. Stupid as that may be, but humans are irrational. That's the basis of humanity. Just irrationality, I think. It's the human condition. So anyway, let's get to talking about those video games then, Bally. You have been playing one game for a very long time that you've had on the back burner that you finally finished up.
Yeah, I kept it under the radar. I've just been playing it pretty much since the start of the year, while I've been playing other things. And that game is Horizon Zero Dawn. So obviously Sony's first-party big hit of 2017. You played it just after Breath of the Wild, I think, in 2017.
Well, I played it a few months later. I think I played it in the summer, like July or something around that time. So yeah, I was coming off of, my love-in with Breath of the Wild, and everyone was raving about Horizon. It was really funny. When Horizon came out, I remember thinking, oh man, the reviews for this are so good. Like, are people going to be underwhelmed when they come to Zelda? Because it's like Nintendo's first take at a real open world game. Like, Sony are clearly have more experience in this. Like, I was very worried that Breath of the Wild was going to underwhelm people. Then it came out and it's like, oh no, actually Nintendo not only made a better game, they redefined the entire fucking genre and made one of the greatest games ever made. So should I have been doubting them? No. So I think that had maybe an impact on me when I came to Horizon, because to me Horizon's like just another open world game. It's just another Ubisoft collectathon-y thing with probably a better story than most of those games, but one that didn't really engage me personally. So I've never been a huge fan of Horizon.
It feels like it takes a lot of those systems and goes really complicated and in-depth with those. And I actually thought overall the game is incredibly impressive, and I really, really enjoyed this game. I think the most impressive part are the battle mechanics and the way that you fight these great mechanical beasts, and some of the animations especially. So one of the main parts of the game is overriding. So you have this spear that basically you plug it into animals, mechanical animals throughout the world, and then they become on
robot
your side.
Dinosaurs, Bally, please. Robot dinosaurs, exactly. So you can control, well, you don't control them, they fight for you once you have overridden them. And so the second you override them, they'll just start fighting their brethren straight away. They'll just turn on them and start fighting them. And just sitting back and hiding in like some long grass and watching these huge mechanical beasts fight each other, I think is one of the most visually incredible things I've actually seen in games. I actually thought that was maybe one of the highlights of the game. And then that's the thing that feels more systematic. It feels more like Zelda, where you can kind of get things to like interact with one another. And I think that it's actually kind of taken from Far Cry, because Far Cry really started establishing that idea of like enemy base camps and taking animals and setting them loose. Like you can set bears loose on enemy soldiers in that game and have it kind of create this like riotous situation where you're not necessarily doing anything, but you have caused these events to take place.
And it just works so well, and like the level of detail on what you're watching is always unbelievable, and there's just so much loot in this game, and like I do think the game gets a little bit bogged down by how the sheer number of materials and different weapons.
Right. I always felt like selling stuff, I didn't know what to sell or what was going to be worth anything, or if I needed to keep something. I can't remember if it like tells you like this is going to be necessary.
Yeah, so each item, it does tell you whether you can trade it for items or sell for shards, or shards are the currency.
Right, but it doesn't like sort it in a way that's easy to just sell all the stuff that you want to sell,
It could be better. It'll label it correctly, but there's maybe not enough options to sort of split between those labeling systems.
Right.
And yeah, God, there are just so many weapons and different ways to take down enemies, where you can focus on one of my favorites was the tripcaster. So you can set up a cable along the floor, and one of my favorites was an explosive cable along the floor. So as long as the animal runs into that cable, it'll explode and shoot them back, sometimes knocking them down. And I used the stun cables, I used the stun arrows. It was late in the game before I started using like the ice arrows, the shock arrows, and stuff like the fire
And when
arrows.
it came to taking down like the larger dinosaurs, were you focusing on taking parts off of them? Like, was that a strategy that you employed and found effective? Because a lot of the game in the lead up was all about detaching elements of them, and then sometimes if it's a large gun, you can like use that against them, stuff like that. Was that helpful?
By the end of the game, my main strategy on most medium to large enemies, and we should say that all the enemies just come for you like hell in this game. Like
it's kind of why
tough.
I don't like it, right? Because your main form of attack is a ranged weapon, which is your bow and arrow. And yet the game is built with these creatures that are so melee aggressive. They will run at you non-stop. They will hunt you down and hound you. And your movement is decent, but the roll and your run speed is not fast enough, I found, to get away in time before they just maul you to death. And so I have these moments where I'm trying to shoot something, but it's running at me, and like I don't have time to get out of the way, like get far enough away to shoot again before it just destroys me. And the melee options that you have are pretty lackluster. So to me it felt like this mismatch of it's so focused on being far away from the enemies, and yet they are always coming at you with melee damage. And so
you really need to know what you're doing. My tips would be like, use the traps, use the tripcaster, stay stealthy.
Right, but the thing is, they're so fast that you cut. Like the tripcaster requires you to take time to do one down, the other down, then run into it. You don't have that time when they're aggressively like coming at you. It just, for me, the speed of the second
they're coming at you, you're already doing badly in the sense like there's a big stealth element where you need to stay hidden. And what I would normally do is identify, right, they've got a blaze canister on them. I'm going to stay stealthy, and I'm going to set up a couple of traps for when they start running and they've identified me. I'm going to shoot that blaze canister. The blaze canister explodes, normally doing about quarter, third, sometimes half damage. It also will knock them down. And the second they're knocked down, I get in there and I will finish it off with the critical hit. So it's like, and I'd also argue that as you unlock more stuff in the game, your spear gets stronger to the point where you can actually knock down the medium to large beasts with your slower R2.
The melee never felt good to me, though. It always felt very spammy and not particularly good. And I think the thing that really gets me is the quality of the animation. I don't think that when you hit, it feels good. I think this is more sound design than anything, but coming off Breath of the Wild and the impeccable sound design of the bow and arrow in that game, it never felt satisfying for me to shoot. It never felt like I was having good damage. There's this really like hollow thud to everything, and even like when you're fighting the human enemies, it just feels like they flop down really weirdly. I'm not going to say lack of polish, because the game is very, very polished and it looks incredible and it's so good, but there are certain elements of the combat that to me feel a little bit off kilter and not as fluid as they should be.
Stuff like the animation to do the critical hit and the stabbing in to like the heart of these beasts feels incredible. And
that stuff is amazing. When you're overriding, I think they do a great job of showing that stuff. But it's more about the mid-combat stuff that irked me somewhat.
I found initially the small, so you got a small swipe and a large swipe with your spear. I found as I played more, it grew on me, and I was hardly using the small swipe unless it was like just to finish off a tiny bit of damage, because I unlocked quite early on the ability to knock down with the larger swipe, which is quite important.
Sure.
Just even from a defensive perspective, because you're knocking them down, and once they've been knocked down, they're susceptible to your critical hit, and you can do a lot of damage with the spear. And I was really into like the bombs with the sling and all this sort of stuff, and it did take me a while to get into it in terms of that sense, where it did take me 15 to 20 hours, I would say, before I was like, right, I've got a full arsenal. I know how to take down, 80% of the beasts in this world. I've discovered how to take them down. I've got a good backup of materials for all these different things, and I know what I'm doing. You definitely feel on the back foot for large parts of the game, and there's a real survivally, like, oh my god, I'm going to die at every single encounter almost. And I actually initially didn't like that a ton, but it did grow on me, and working out, actually, I can be patient. I can scan them. I can work out their tracks. I know that we're in a valley right now, so if they start running, they're going to have to go through that point. Therefore, if I put, a blast tripcaster there, I know they're going to be knocked over there, and I can set up like a whole herd to sprint through that valley by bombing the area behind them, forcing them through into my trap, doing a ton of damage, and finishing them off with some critical hits. Like I loved the way the synergy of those mechanics together, which feels far more huntery and like connected between weapons, and versus a game like Breath of the Wild. But that's not exactly what obviously Breath of the Wild is going for.
No, it's totally different.
But this feels far more huntery in that sense, and I really liked that. A huge part of this game, and the reason I loved it so much actually, is the story. I think the second that you're in that world and you see these mechanical beasts and robo dinosaurs and things, you're wanting to know, how on earth, why is the world like this? What is the how did it come to this point? You want to know the history of the world. And I think the game is quite good at drip feeding that, but then it kind of tells you the whole thing in a
it's kind of like a big dump.
It's a big dump near, like, not near the end, but sort of in the run up to the end, like the final 6, 7, 8 hours. And that final 6, 7, 8 hours story wise is one of my favorite stories in games, to be honest. I really, really got into this story. I think that there is far too much fluff to do with the tribes in the game and the tribal politics and deception and these sorts of things that don't directly relate to the history of the world. And
it's not about like the overarching story. It's more about like the current society. And
exactly.
What's going on,
and that stuff is very dull, and it's fine, but it's the sci-fi aspect of the history of the world that is the absolute best bit of the game story-wise. And I think when you look at the best bits of this game, so like that story and the mechanical hunting and the fighting between beasts and the overriding, I think this game has a lot to offer. I think that Aloy as a character is fascinating. She's incredibly sassy. Like, there's so much talking back she does to most of the characters in the game, and it's great.
Ashley Birch is very good. I think she's really come into her own as a voice actress in the last few years or so. She's great in Life is Strange. She's very good in this game. Very good performance, I would say.
I do think the game falls down where a lot of the animations of the story stuff, the voice acting is very awkward, and especially when you compare that to God of War and Spider-Man just the next year from Sony first party.
Right. It's just some of the facial stuff which is a bit rough, but like the thing you always have to consider when talking about Horizon is that this came from a studio that made first-person shooters, linear, dark, gritty first-person shooters, and for them to go from that to a completely different thing, which is an open-world RPG that is so colorful and vibrant and all about narrative. I feel like you can forgive them for a lot of those things, because it's kind of incredible what they did.
It really is. This is like such an impressive game. I think the world has good diversity in the sense of like there's jungles, forests, deserts, snowy peaks. I think it's good for that sort of thing, but it's not very good for, like, we talked about how Breath of the Wild is like a theme park. Wherever you're standing in that park, you can see iconic buildings, and
you can orient yourself. You know where you are in the world. Whereas Horizon,
landmarks,
everything kind of looks the same, and you don't like. I never had a sense of the place that I was in.
The sense of place isn't as good in terms of like a world to explore,
and that's why I think the open world is kind of superfluous in this game. It's not really a necessity, and Tim Geddes talked about this when the game came out, but he played it more like Uncharted, where he was just going story mission to story mission. And honestly, if it had been more of a linear game, I think I would have liked it more. I think actually the open world kind of takes away from some of the stuff that you're trying to do.
I would have struggled playing it like that simply for just going on an exploration and getting in the extra parts is so useful in combat, because you need all those materials as you burn through ammo on a lot,
because the game is very challenging. Like, you need to upgrade stuff in order to do well. The way I dealt with that though was I got fed up with the combat, so I switched it to easy, and then I didn't have to worry about that shit, like I was just so done with the combat that I was like, I don't care, you put me on easy, let me just finish the story.
I loved the combat. I really
and I think we're just at odds there. I think we're just generally at odds with this game, because the story
really
completely underwhelmed me. I had zero interest in it. Well, not zero. Like, I think there was...
I mean, my favourite parts are the combat and the story, and you're like, the combat and story were not great.
It's literally the worst parts of the game for me. Not the worst, but like, the world was cool. It never gave me a satisfying conclusion or answer to anything that I thought would have been interesting. I don't know. I felt it was rather not necessarily predictable, but I didn't think that it was particularly satisfying in terms of what it ended up, being. So.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questions I want answered, and I'm very excited for the sequel. I think the worst part of the game is the human-to-human combat. You mentioned it earlier. It's because you've got this great swinging arc and this slow, powerful R2 sort of finishing style move. And other than that, you've got your bow and arrow and your other weapons that don't really work on the humans in the same way. I think that the human-to-human combat was a real afterthought, and just
right, because it's not really about like setting things up. It's more just shoot them, you know.
Yeah, and also their intelligence just seems really weird. They'll just stand back and start shooting, and then they'll charge you. Whereas a lot of the beasts in this game seem more intelligent than the humans when it comes to combat. It's like,
there's some rough AI on the humans.
Yeah, you can really tell a lot more time and energy was spent on those mechanical beasts, and that is by far and away the most impressive part and most satisfying part of the game to play when it comes to the combat. But I can see they felt they had to do the humans to human stuff just because of the amount of tribal politics in this game.
Right, yeah.
It's not great, as I said, story-wise, but overall, I'm pumped for like the sequel to this game. There's some nice twists in the tales near the end that's like building to a next step, and if the PS5 launches with the Horizon Zero Dawn 2, I'm probably in, you know, like I'm really into this world that they've created, and I must have done, I wish they had a clock on PS4, but I spent probably 40 to 50 hours with this game, and I did a decent chunk of side stuff, and most of my side stuff was just literally exploring and leveling up. It wasn't.
Did you get all the tall necks? Did you open up the whole map?
No, I left a couple of the tournaments.
Oh, really?
I got all of them bar like 2, I think. But so I did a lot more exploration. I got to level 42 in the end, I think. And the level up system is weird, where it basically all it does is give you a level up point. You can spend those points on your skill tree.
Right.
And it also improves your defense by like 10% or something. So it's good overall. Very happy. I'm a real sucker for a good third-person open world game, and I think this game does a lot of great things. Don't get me wrong, Breath of the Wild is still by far and away better than this game, but I like what this game was trying to do.
It's a good one of those. That's how I look at it. It's like, it's a good one of those, but I'm kind of over one of those you know, when things like Witcher 3 and Breath of the Wild exist, I've seen that the open world genre can do so much more, and so when it comes to like every year another Assassin's Creed, I'm like, well, it's just kind of like there's nothing surprising or new about it. It's like I've done this rodeo, I've been down this path, so cool.
And then very quickly, I beat a PSVR game, Super Hot
Bally,
VR.
back on his VR nonsense again.
I'm loving the VR nonsense right now. So you've played Super Hot on PC, right?
And I fucking love Super Hot. It is such a smart, amazing game with so many. It just makes you feel awesome. And when I was telling you about this game, you're like, oh yeah, there's the VR version. I'm like, Bally, fucking play that. And you're like, oh really? And I was like, yes, because it is one of those experiences. It's one of those experiences that I imagine, having played the original, is gonna be amazing, because the way you feel just playing it on like keyboard and mouse on PC is pretty damn cool. Actually being in the environment and like dodging bullets and throwing guns and like... It seems like something that would be pretty spectacular.
So for those who don't know, time moves when you move, and you're shooting and stealing guns off enemies and killing them. Obviously, like the difference here is time doesn't move when your head moves. So now like you said with VR, you now have the ability to actually dodge bullets.
What do you mean time moves when your head moves?
Time doesn't move when your head moves. So time always moves very slowly in this game. We should say that. It doesn't actually stand still. But time moves when your hands move in this game. So as long as you keep your hands still, you can actually look around the room checking for enemies.
Right, okay.
And time will move a little bit when your head moves.
Yeah. It's always been like that, where it's like very, very slow.
So you have the ability to dodge bullets, and that just by itself feels... You could just have a VR game where you're just standing there dodging bullets in slow motion, and it would probably be a pretty cool game. But this game...
Are you stationary the whole time? Because what I've seen from this game is you like are staying in one place, and they will kind of throw enemies and situations at you as you kind of stand there and deal with it.
You are stationary all the time, but I mean, you can move within the range of the PSVR camera.
Right,
you can still... So...
it doesn't have any like teleportation stuff where you're moving yourself around like that or anything?
A tiny bit, but so you know, there's 30 levels, and each level is split into like 4 or 5 mini levels.
Yeah.
And so it might be like, there's one level where it says dance, and you're like on this table like with a pole in the middle, and you're essentially a dancer. Okay. And there's 3 dudes shooting you, and the game is expecting you to just dodge bullets for like I don't know, a few 30 seconds or so.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
the next phase is actually behind the dudes. So it'll warp you behind the dudes, and then you can take them on.
Okay, but it's like a different level essentially.
It's essentially a different level. So you aren't actually warping around yourself. It's just the next level is
it just
warp.
loads it into a different place. Yeah. Okay.
And it can get really tough. Like, it's really easy to feel pretty overwhelmed in this game. It's like there's a plain level where I got completely overwhelmed, and I realized that all I needed to do was duck. There were like chairs in front of me, and I just had to duck. And then I'd poke my head out around the corner, see some dudes, and I just start shooting them from like crouching down on the ground. And Caroline found this hilarious, but there's a lot
like
of
that's
levels.
the thing with VR is people watching you do VR think you're an idiot.
But there's so many levels near the end where there's a lot more emphasis on cover shooting and just using a bit of cover where it gives it to you. And there's like one level where you pick up a frying pan and you're just holding that on your left side, blocking a dude while you're shooting other dudes.
Yeah.
And it's something special. And it's one of those things, it's a good example of virtual reality when it's not replicating real life, it's replicating real life and then making real life better, in the sense that I could go paintballing and stand on the spot and probably have a fun time, but I wouldn't be able to dodge bullets in slow motion.
Exactly,
and that's where
yeah.
a virtual world can obviously
it.
do that. Exactly. So it's one of those things where you're like, wow, this is really, really quite something. So I will say that I don't think the PSVR version is incredible in the sense that there can be points where the second that your arms cross over or something gets in the way of like the camera detecting the light on the end of the Move controller, your guns can start kind of flying around the level, or like your hands just aren't. It can drop out for a split second, and it can get fiddly where, say, you're ducking for cover and there's a number of weapons all quite close to each other on the ground. It can sometimes get a little finicky, like trying to pick up and drop the correct weapons, but.
Right.
All the stuff, like by the end of the game, I knew exactly how many bullets were like in each gun, and I'd like count through them and stuff like this.
Okay.
You really feel that, like, all the shotguns have 2 bullets, and you're like, right, I love the shotgun, but I have to recognize it has 2 bullets. So I was like, bang, bang, drop, pick up, take those guys out, drop, duck. Okay, this guy's coming. He's coming right at me. I'll just punch him. Right, he's dropped a pistol. Grab the pistol. Right, here's some more dudes. Bang,
it's the
bang.
grabbing out of midair in VR that for me gets me most excited, because that was one of the coolest things to do, is like punch a dude, grab his gun out of midair as he drops it. But like actually physically doing that seems so cool.
Just picking up a gun and shooting down sights in VR on its own feels incredible. But then adding, like you said, when they drop guns, you're picking them up, it's all in slow motion, and then you're dodging bullets, and then you shoot a guy, and you even unlock an ability where it's basically like a Jedi using the Force kind of thing, where I don't know if this is in the main game, but you basically just hold both arms together and you can blow off the head of like a single dude. So
shit, that is not in Super Hot, so goddamn.
Right, so say I don't have any weapons, I've used up all my guns, and there are 2 dudes walking towards me. I can just immediately duck for cover, use Force, I'll just stand up again, and one of them's been blasted by me. And then I can get the gun off the other one, but often the guys with guns will always walk towards you. So if you're one-on-one with anyone in the game, you can get by just by dodging the bullets essentially, and then grabbing the gun off them and shooting them with their own gun. It's ridiculous. It's a very, very special game, I think. I think it's one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had in gaming, and it's a great use of showing off VR to someone who's doesn't know what the hype around VR is. It's a fairly cheap game on PSVR. It's quite something, and I am still in awe at what the feelings that game like makes you feel is something special. I really want you to try this game, MZ.
Yeah, I want to play it real bad, man. God, Super Hot. You should play the original now as well, because I think both are completely different games. And the original actually has a lot of stuff in it, which is like kind of narrative stuff that is very cool as well. And I kind of talked about it a bit on the show, but it is very fourth wall breaky, and it does some neat, unexpected things that you should definitely experience.
This game hints at the fourth wall breaking, and then doesn't really do anything with it.
Okay.
Like, it just kind of there's a thing, but
I mean, it's usually on sale on PSN at some point. You know, pick up for £3 at some point. I'd say it's a good shout. But yeah, cool. Excellent. So yeah, you've been playing a lot of that stuff.
I've also started Ape Out and not Super Hot, Beat Saber, as I mentioned. I'll talk about those two next time.
Yeah, Ape Out on Switch. People been chatting.
That's a very good game. People need to try and play.
Cool. Yeah, well, we'll hear about that next time, hopefully. Myself, I have been playing a lot of action games. Two games came at similar times for me. One, an old game, one, a new game. I've been playing Devil May Cry 5, which I'm not going to talk a huge amount about, but I think that I'm not one for these types of games usually. I'm very bad at them. I'm very bad at character action. I bought the original Bayonetta 2 on Wii U, having played the demo, because it just felt so fucking amazing. I played that demo and I was like, holy shit, this game feels awesome, and I want to play it, and I did. But I played through it on easy. Yes, I did. Yeah. I tend to do that, like with Platinum games. I played Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance on easy as well. And I did the same for Devil May Cry 5, and I kind of maybe regret it a little bit, because I think Devil May Cry 5 is challenging, but I don't think on normal I wouldn't have been able to finish it. Like, I think I could have done it, and I think it would have taxed me a bit, but I do think I had the ability to do so. It just would have taken a little bit of, learning the mechanics a bit more, but there's just so much in this game. It's overwhelming in a way in terms of options and things you can do. There's 3 separate characters. They all play so differently, with Nero, V, and Dante. And Dante in himself is just ridiculous. Like, he has access to so many different weapons and styles, and the game is all about just the style of it and the fluidity of combat and juggling enemies and just swapping between all your different options. My favorite thing, because I played the original Devil May Cry last year to kind of catch up on the series and be like, what is this about? What is the game like? And I don't think the original Devil May Cry holds up that well, but the thing I thought was really cool about it is you can jump in midair and shoot guns, and you just hover there as you're shooting your guns. So you're like Ebony and Ivory, the 2 twin pistols that Dante wields. You're just like hovering there shooting guns, and that plays into this game as well. Like, you can do that with Nero and with Dante, and it's all about switching things up. So like keeping your combo going by continuously shooting, and just like throwing so many different moves in there, and it's relatively easy to get your head around. It's not like a fighting game where you're learning 7 button inputs and like it's really complicated. Most of it is done through 2 buttons, which is your melee button and your range button, so like X and Y, and it is pretty simple, because it's more like timed button presses. So to do a certain move, you like press X, wait a second, then press XX. So it's just more about timing than it is about learning a lot of different things. But there's so much ridiculousness. There's the thing that's been heavily marketed is that Dante has this weapon, which is basically a motorcycle. And it might be the most fun I've had with a weapon in a video game. It is so absurd and ridiculous. And you're just swinging these 2 halves of a motorcycle around. And then you're like juggling people in midair with it. And its special move is Dante gets on it and starts like riding it into enemies and like slicing them with the wheels. It is just absurd in the most hilarious and fun way possible, and the game runs so well. My PC is getting a little old now. It's like 6 years, and I have a 970, which is kind of it's still a good graphics card, but it's showing a bit of its age. But it looks incredible. Like the new engine that Capcom have been using recently with Resident Evil 2 Remake, like characters look so good. Their faces and the animations are incredible, and it just ran so smooth at 60 the whole time. It is such a thrill ride. There's so much fun stuff that goes on. Yeah, I'm not one for these games, but I had a fucking blast with Devil May Cry 5. It is, and not even to mention V, who's the new character, who plays, like, Waypoint described him like a Pokemon trainer, because he just kind of stands there as his shadow cat and his bird attack for him, and it's very weird to describe, because watching video footage of it, I didn't really understand how it works, but essentially, as you tap the melee button and the range button, the shadow cat is like the physical attacks, and the bird is like kind of a gun where it shoots out like laser bolts and stuff. And they kind of like just attack for you as you walk around, but they can't kill enemies, so you always have to do this final blow. So you basically get enemies into a staggered state, and then you warp over them to finish them off. And so it feels so satisfying to like stagger an enemy, like warp over there and slice them while still attacking another enemy at the same time, and then like chaining together these staggers. they nailed what a video game should feel like, and Capcom are very unabashed with this. In some senses, it feels like a PS2 game still, down to a lot of the platforming and things like that, but it feels like a PS2 game that had $5 billion thrown at it, because it is so good looking, feels so amazing, just looks incredible. It's this weird mix of worlds where it's like clearly a very old school type of game, and the story is nonsense. It's very hammy and cheesy, but it is all about that, and it leans into it in such a good way. Some of the slow-mo stuff they do with the cutscenes is just it's over the top. Love it. Had a great time with DMC5. Would recommend people check it out. The other thing that I've been playing, which I think is fantastic, is a 2D action game, which is Hyper Light Drifter, which is out on Switch. People can check it out there. I got it.
Has it got a Switch tax?
It is, yes. It's like $17.99. I have it free. There's this kind of thing that's going on right now, is like all these games I want to play on Switch, suddenly Twitch Prime has them, and I just have them for free on Twitch Prime. So like Battle Chef Brigade, which I wanted to play on Switch, I played that on Twitch Prime. This Snake Pass, which just went on Twitch Prime, even though Snake Pass has been on sale recently, I think. But I've been playing Hyper Light Drifter, and I finished it as well. And that game it's hard to describe, because I think it is in some senses like a 2D Zelda. Like, it's this top-down game, and it's pixel art style. It looks really cool, but I'd never been super interested in it because it seemed more actiony than puzzly and exploration-y. And I think that's what we enjoy most about Zelda, is the more puzzly, exploration-y aspects. But the thing about Hyper Light Drifter is the combat is so damn good and satisfying, in a similar way to Devil May Cry 5, that pulled me the whole way through. So the setup is that you're this kind of drifter. You have a dash and a sword attack, and you also have a gun, so you have a bit of ranged options as well. So you have those three kind of options, and the overworld is set up that there's this central town, and there are 4 areas, like north, west, east, and south, and you can kind of go wherever you want from the beginning. So it is non-linear. I think the south portion is the one that you have to do last, so you have to do the first 3, then you do the last one, which is the south area. But the way it works is, like, you don't really know what the best route to do is, so you can kind of just choose any direction. And the direction I went in first of all is the west. And I looked up online afterwards. Most people recommend not doing that because it is the hardest area to start with. But I did it, and I went there. And what it really solidified for me was getting the combat down. And a lot of the enemies in this game, they'll usually have like 3 health. So your regular sword attack usually isn't fast enough to kill them in one combo. So like you'll hit them twice, but then they are not staggered by it, so they will jump at you and like slice at you before you can kill them. So you'll take a hit if you try and just spam away. So the game really teaches you from the early stages that you need to slice, dash away, dash back, and then slice again. And they really vary up the types of enemies that you're facing to change the game and to make it so much more engaging. Like, there are enemies that they kind of warp, so they show you, and that's the thing, the game gives you all this information as well, so you always know where the enemy will end up. So it shows you like a split second beforehand where they're going to warp to. They warp to that point and slice at that point, so you have to be like, okay, I'm going to slice you, I'm going to dodge away to where you're warping to, so then I can finish you off. And they do a great job of mixing enemies together in these combinations that are really difficult, but so satisfying to take down. There are so many moments of just elation where you have this really challenging combat encounter, but you're able to make it through and you feel fantastic for it. And the way the game works is you have a healing system that is not similar to Hollow Knight, but I would say you do have to find a safe spot in order to heal. It's a lot faster, like it doesn't take as long as it does in that game, but you definitely need to pick your battles. So in terms of like, if you're running low on health, you need to really check yourself and be like, okay, I've got to dash away, quickly heal, and then get back into the fight. So all the areas are really well built in terms of balance. Like, they'll have enough med kits for you where you can take a decent number of hits but still survive for long enough. And the other thing that you kind of collect are these shards that, when you get 4 of them, they turn into a coin, and the coin is the currency that you can use to buy upgrades, and you can use to increase the amount of ammo that your guns have. So a lot of the game in terms of exploration, secret finding, it's less puzzly, and it's more just finding areas that look like there's something going on. A lot of the times there are these symbols. The game is doesn't have any dialogue, so it's very mysterious. It's kind of like Fez in that way, where it doesn't really explain itself. And a lot of it is like symbology and stuff like that. So there are usually like little markers on the ground, like tiny little square markers, where if you go up to them and you like hold down a certain button, it will maybe reveal an invisible platform in midair that you can actually go across and find a hidden area where you can get like, you know, some more shards, or you can get like a new cape or a new sword or something along those lines. And every area also has these cores, so that's kind of how you unlock the map. Is you get to an area, you have to get a certain number of cores to unlock the boss, and then you go and fight the boss, and then it raises like this tower in the center. And the idea is you have to do all 4 areas, and then you come back to the center for the kind of final encounter. But the boss design is fantastic. It really, like, the first boss that I fought was in the west area where people said you shouldn't go there, because he is so fast and aggressive, and really requires a lot of learning of patterns and knowing where he's going to be, and just smart play, which I died so many times on him, but every time I was learning something new, and I always felt like, okay, this is achievable, I can do this, like I can overcome this challenge. And later on, like, I started to really mix it up a lot. Like, I relied a lot more on the gun, because one of the ones you get is a shotgun blast, and so it does 3 shotgun bursts at a very short range. But if you're right in front of an enemy, all 3 of those blasts will hit them, so it'll do 3 damage to them. So you can really take down a huge chunk of enemy health by using the shotgun blast smartly. And the ammo situation builds into your combat as well, because in order to regain bullets, you have to slice your sword. So like slicing your sword charges up your, it's similar, like I guess in Hollow Knight, like your slashes charge up your juice or whatever. This time it charges up your bullets, and so it really is that balance of using the shotgun a bunch, and I did that on lots of bosses, but also you need to start slicing them again to build that up. So it's this kind of balancing between the two. It looks really good. I think it has a pixel art style that I'm not a huge fan of usually, but I think it does work for what they're going for, and it's kind of this top-down thing. One of my favorite things it does actually is the enemies stay dead, because there is a lot of times when you're going back through areas to find things and see if you can figure out where the hidden stuff is.
That's quite unusual in games like that, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that is a really great addition, because it means it's not hindering your backtracking and it's not annoying you. Like, I really love the combat in this game, but if it was constant and assaulting me when I'm going back through areas and respawning people, that would suck. Like, I really don't like that, and that's kind of a thing of old school game design that I'm not a fan of. But even like down to where the corpses were when you slayed them, because they all stay on the ground. So you walk through this area you've been through, and all the enemies that you killed in exactly the same places they were, which is cool. Yeah, it's dark, yeah, but I think that is a neat touch, and it kind of emphasizes some of the harshness of the world. And like, it doesn't really have a story necessarily. It's more, lore story, not really lore, like there are cutscenes, but it's very
subtle. Apparently I watched the review. There's no,
a lot of it is, I think,
story.
Quite biographical, because the dude who made this game had like quite a bad illness when he was making it. I think he still does. I can't remember what it is, but the main character of this game is also suffering from an illness, so they will often like go into a state of comatose, or they will start coughing up blood and stuff, and when your health is low, pools of blood will just appear at your feet as you kind of walk along. So yeah, there's definitely some of that in it, that makes it a little bit more narratively interesting. But the game itself is just so immaculately made and feels amazing, and I think that I want to play more that this developer have made, and they just announced a new game, which is cool. It's more of a 3D game called Solar Ash Kingdom that we don't know much about right now, but is that linked to this game in any way, or do you think it's something completely? I don't know. It has a similar aesthetic to it. Right. It's similar name scheme wise, because like Hyper Light Drifter, Solar Ash Kingdom, like 3 things. I don't know what that game's going to be, but I would highly recommend people check this game out. The good thing is they updated it, because when it originally came out, it was 30 frames per second on PC even, which is like that's not a thing you should do. So they changed it. I think it runs at 60 on Switch. It should do, but it is that fluidity as well that works so amazingly. There's some of the stuff that's a little bit too obscure for me. Like one of the upgrades is a chain dash. So if you time button presses correctly, you can like dash like to gain speed over a kind of large distance. But it doesn't explain it very well. When you buy the item, it just says press A then A. And so it doesn't really give you the sense that it's a specific, like, rhythmically timed thing. It's not, because I was just, like, spamming A and it wasn't doing it. And I was like, how the hell does this work? So I had to go on YouTube and look up a guide of how to do it. Which, you know, to some degree, games like this thrive on that stuff of, like, being a little bit obscure. But I think when it comes to the base game mechanics, you should maybe be a bit more clear about it. And you do get really cool upgrades that are kind of necessary later on. One of them is you are able to reflect bullets, so your sword can reflect bullets back at enemies, and that gets very important because there are a lot more enemies later in the game that have guns that use them against you, and there's a particular boss near the end that is just like kind of a bullet hell thing, and so if you don't have the ability to reflect bullets, you're going to have a real rough time against him. So yeah, some of that stuff is optional but kind of feels necessary, and you should be going out of your way to find secrets, because a lot of the secrets are that currency that will allow you to buy a lot of the upgrades in the game. So yeah, I would say you should kind of maybe do that. But otherwise, I was so impressed by it. I think it is one of my favorite things I've played this year so far. Amazing. Nice. And, you know, yeah, you should check out Hyper Light Drifter. It is so good.
Add it to my watch list.
Yeah, definitely do. So, yeah, so that is going to close us out for this first segment. Lots of video games. We are going to continue that trend after the break, talking about one in particular, which is Luigi's Mansion, for our next Backlog Club. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, folks, welcome back to the show. It is time to talk about our next Backlog Club game, which we had people vote on for our Patreon, and it turned out that people wanted us to play Luigi's Mansion. Now, we ended up playing the 3DS version, the remake that came out last year, but, you know, if people play along on the GameCube instead, you know, it's pretty similar. I don't think they made too many radical changes in this version of Luigi's Mansion. But again, I didn't play the original, so I wouldn't necessarily know.
I did play the original.
Yes,
NBZ.
you did.
So I played all of about the first 45 minutes, if that, of this game when I was younger. And how old was I been when the GameCube came out? So I got this on launch.
2001, we were about 10, I guess.
Yeah, so I was like 10, 11 max, and I found this game very, very like scary when I played the short amount I did at the time.
Hey, look, I think listeners of the show realize that both of us are massive wusses when it comes to anything horror related, anything scary. So it's a given that as children, something like Luigi's Mansion, which is very much parodying the type of horror tropes, to be actually frightening and terrifying.
Yeah, but as much as horrifying as I found it, I actually did enjoy it, but I think it was partially the horror and just my inability to stick to games at the time that it just kind of meant I veered away to other stuff at the time.
And it was the GameCube launch, right? So there were things like Melee had come out, and we were just playing Smash Brothers constantly and nothing else, basically.
Yeah, Melee was a bit after launch, and then, on launch I bought this, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, and Rogue Squadron.
Right, and you loved Rogue Squadron.
I played a lot more Rogue Squadron and Tony Hawk's. Turns out, like, a few years later, I, like, traded in all three of those games.
Nightmare.
Mistakenly. Like, that was just
I actually went and rebought. Well, I never owned it, but I bought a copy of Rogue Squadron for GameCube because I found it cheap in our game shop we go to.
And I bought Rebel Strike years later, and that's got Rogue Squadron co-op in that game, which is very cool.
Yeah, but you can only play it as co-op, can't you? You can't play it single player.
Yeah, it's only co-op.
Yeah.
And considering you would be my ideal co-op partner, that's probably not
not
going to go very far.
Because I'm very bad at those games, yeah. Just not good at all. But Luigi's Mansion is one of those games that defined the GameCube launch. It was a big deal, right? Because for so long, Nintendo had defined their console launches through Mario games.
For 18 years, I believe. I think the last system to launch without Mario was...
There wasn't one, because...
I read 18 years somewhere.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Well, I mean, if you think, no one necessarily knows when the NES launched, but I believe Super Mario Brothers was there when it came out. Obviously, the Super Nintendo had Super Mario well packed in for many people, and N64 was Mario 64. So Mario was the defining launch title for Nintendo systems, and we finally have a Nintendo system where they didn't. They decided, Mario Sunshine wasn't ready yet. They couldn't put it out at launch, so they had this other game, this other project they had been working on, which is Luigi's Mansion. And I don't know the genesis of Luigi's Mansion, whether it's another Miyamoto story of, one day I decided to go to a theme park and go in the horror house, and then I had the idea for Luigi's Mansion, like he does with Pikmin.
It was going to be a 3D game initially. We know that much.
Yes, and I wanted to bring that up, right, because... it's so interesting that finally, all this time later, 17 years almost, that they finally realized the original intent of Luigi's Mansion, because what they wanted for the GameCube was for it to have a 3D display. And there's Iwata basically had told people around the time when the 3DS was coming out, because it was a big deal when 3DS was launching, they'd finally managed to do this thing that they'd actually been working on for a really long time. And obviously, if you go back to even Virtual Boy, they've been toying with varieties of ways to get 3D across. But there was a kind of the thing they were going to do was have an LCD screen. I've actually got a quote from one of the Iwata Asks that they did, where they said, yes, we tried fitting the Nintendo GameCube system with a small, roughly 4-inch LCD that allowed you to enjoy Luigi's Mansion in glasses-free 3D. And then Iwata says, we showed that LCD as a reference exhibit at 2002 E3, but kept the 3D aspect secret. So very, very cool that even back then they were considering the potential of 3D and what it could do for games and how it could change them and make things more interesting. And obviously, there are many ways that they did that on the 3DS, but ultimately the 3D fad kind of came and went, and it's sad, right? Because it's one of those eras that I will miss. I think it was so nice going back to play this game because I had missed 3D. I'd been playing my Switch for so long now, the last couple of years, and I haven't played too much 3DS in the kind of interim. So picking it up again and having a full 3D game was really great. Because I think the last 3DS game I fully went whole hog on was Dragon Quest VIII, and they didn't have 3D in that version. That a lot of late era 3DS games, they took it out, but I'm glad that with this game they put it in. And I think the reason they put it in is because of the history of it, because historically they wanted to originally have Luigi's Mansion in 3D. So yeah, it's cool that they realized it. I guess talking about that, how much do you think the 3D helps in this game? How much do you think it affects it?
Gameplay wise, maybe not a ton, but it certainly makes the game really look great when you're looking at these, because I mean, when they were selling the 3DS concept initially, and people were like, how can it be 3D? And then Nintendo would sort of say, well, think about it in terms of not things popping out at you, but rather looking into a box. And when you're playing a game like Luigi's Mansion, where you're essentially just looking into a large series of boxes in these rooms, I think it works really well, and especially with stuff like the portrait ghost sticking out and some of the animations that they do, and they are obviously translucent, and 3D with that translucency of the ghosts in the game, similar to Dark Moon, looks very, very good. Dark Moon is one of the best looking 3DS games for its 3D, I think, and this game kind of plays well. I don't think it looks as good as Dark Moon necessarily. It still looks a lot better than the original, and still looks very good, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is that diorama idea of, going deep, because I think the first time I tried a 3DS, there was an event in Edinburgh that I went to test out to see what the 3D was like, and it really was such a weird thing seeing it for the first time, because I had expected it to be like popping out of the screen at you, because that's what 3D had been in the past, and yet Nintendo's 3D is all about depth and all about looking into a space, and that was really something that Luigi's Mansion was built for. Like, every room is this kind of little box that you peer into, and the way the camera works as Luigi like works his way through the mansion, you're always on that fixed perspective. You're never moving to a different angle for Luigi. Like, Luigi is on this it is really like this 2D plane the entire time, and whether you're going into the foreground or the background, it's always kind of keeping the same locked on angle, and they even represent that in the Smash Brothers stage, like, because it is all those rooms and you kind of go through them as you kind of tumble through the mansion, which is neat. Now, having played this game, I really want to go back and pay more attention to that Smash Brothers stage, because I'm sure every room in there is a reference to one of the rooms in this game, which is so cool, because there are so many like little areas and things. But I guess let's just kick things off generally by what we think about the game overall. Did we enjoy it, and things like that, and how we felt. So, Bally, what did you think of Luigi's Mansion?
I really enjoyed it. It's got some flaws, it's got some issues, but I think it's that Nintendo polish on something very far from what Nintendo traditionally would go for, and that's always refreshing. When Nintendo say, hey, like a game like Splatoon, it's like, right, we're going to take this shooting genre and we're going to do a Nintendo twist on it. And I think this is that kind of kiddie down horror style game with a heavy dose of Nintendo.
Yeah.
And I think that brief, it just does incredibly well. I think that it's a very short game, but I think it kind of fits this game in a way. I think Dark Moon was actually a little bit too long by the end, and it's nice to be away with the mission structure, which I think was one of the weaker parts of Dark Moon. And this game just feels open world's not really the right word for.
No, it feels very like condensed, you know.
It's a condensed open world.
Yeah, but it's a very familiar space, and I think that's the thing I like about it the most, is that you really get to know the mansion, you really get to know its ins and outs, and I think one of the criticisms we can talk about is, like, I think it forces you through some areas like a few too many times. But what that does, does do is it makes you remember places, right? And each room has its own unique thing to it to make you remember where it is and what perspective it is. So yeah, I think that's kind of a strength. I also really enjoyed it. I think it is interesting because back in the day, everyone complained after the GameCube launch, like, man, this game's too short. I beat it in an afternoon. Like, what am I going to do with my GameCube now? And obviously, I have sympathy for that plight at that point in time, because you've just got a brand new console. The first game you get, you're done with it already.
It's not quite Breath of the Wild.
No, but in our state right now, when we want to play lots of games and get through stuff, playing Luigi's Mansion was really refreshing in terms of, here's this really great idea, this high quality Nintendo game that is in and out in 6 hours, and I thought it was just so well paced for that. I think it does a really good job with the pacing, and there are times where it feels padded, but I think overall it's a really tight experience that has a lot of fun ideas and varies things up enough that you're never really bored of it. I think the idea can potentially run thin, and maybe to some degree I'd say Dark Moon does that, but I think this game, as we have said, is like a really kind of tightly woven package. So
absolutely.
So yeah, really enjoyed it. So I think one of the first things that you have to get your grips around with this game is how it controls, right? Because in the GameCube era, we had the C-Stick, and I don't know if you remember how that game controlled on GameCube, but I think using that second analog stick was not something that either of us were very used to, and not until I got a PS3 did I really start using dual analog for anything or really understanding how it properly works. But the way it works on 3DS is either you can use motion control for it, or you can hold down one of the shoulder buttons or like B and then like move the analog stick while you're holding them. So all these different like ways of holding the button down, it was a little bit clunky, and I felt that it's one of the weaker aspects of the game, and I didn't go back to Dark Moon to check, but I wanted to. I don't know if you went back to it, because I remember the controls in Dark Moon being a lot easier than this, and for some reason it felt like when I started playing this game it was a little bit more difficult to get my head around, moving everything around and getting the vacuum to go in the directions I wanted it to.
Yeah, and it even has a mode where you can use the analog nub on the new 3DS.
Right.
And that
it's so
awful.
bad. It just
feels really
and
bad.
I've never really used that before, right? Because I got a new 3DS with like a capture card built into it, and I haven't used it too much since I got it. Yeah. So, like, particularly that nub is something that is specific to certain games, and they added it as an option here, but it really doesn't work. I don't really know how it's supposed to work, but sometimes I'm pushing it really hard, and sometimes I'm like trying to do it softly. I just don't know the way it's calibrated for this game.
It's badly calibrated because I've used it in Xenoblade Chronicles 3D years ago when I played that game, and it felt good then. And that obviously isn't an action usage, it's for the camera, but it still worked very well. And for something like aiming the poltergeist up and down, like I would have thought it could have been a little bit more functional, and it just isn't. So I used the motion control, actually. I kind of regret that. I don't know. I don't think I fiddled enough with the different control options early in the game, and I sort of swapped between them briefly, and they both felt bad. Yeah. And I just sort of went with the one that felt least bad in a way.
Definitely. There is really a finickiness to it that I really like the idea, and I love the notion of like Luigi using this vacuum cleaner to point at ghosts and to take them out and everything. But the positional way that it works, like sometimes I think the speed with which you move him around, like holding down the B button to swing it like left and right, or spin himself around quickly on a dime, sometimes because the ghosts were quite fast at points, it's hard to react quickly, because the other thing that you need to be aware of is the bulb and like the settings on the bulb, whether you want it to be like holding it down or whether you want it to just flash. And I had to mess around with that a bit as well in terms of like what version of the bulb I wanted, and I ended up going with holding it down to charge, and I was never really 100% certain on how that worked, right? Like, because it feels like some enemies you do have to fully charge it to get them, and then sometimes you'll use it on an enemy and you haven't charged it, but it still stuns them. And that seemed, for me, that was maybe one of the inconsistencies I felt, was there was never a clear way to stun an enemy, whether it be...
I think the charge is the size of the arc. So even if you do a little charge, if they're right in front of you, you'll still catch them.
Okay, because sometimes like you flash it at them and they stop for a tiny fraction of a second, which isn't enough time for you to start vacuuming them.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So like there was a weird inconsistency there with the bulb and just figuring that stuff out. But again, I think like it's weird because Nintendo have these two conflicting elements. Like on the one hand, they want you to use the 3D. On the other hand, they want you to use the motion controls, and that's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It just isn't gonna work. And even with the 3DS, the new 3DS having like the adjustable 3D that's supposed to move with you, it just never was a good experience of using motion controls while having 3D on at the same time. I did it to some degree just because sometimes it's a bit more intuitive and it worked a bit faster, but every time I would lose something from the experience because the 3D would go out of focus, or I'd have to like readjust my hands or whatever. So I don't know the easiest way to do it, right? Because I don't know, like going back to Dark Moon maybe and seeing what they did there, I can't really remember. That's one of those things I should have done before.
I am glad you can play about 80 to 90% of the game on a flat 2D plane.
Right.
Like you don't have to look up and down. And it is, I would have preferred if there were fewer action moments where you needed to look up and down, especially those ghosts like get in the way that in the corridors and things that are right up above you, and you had to, it's like, all right, here we go,
because you have to angle it at a high degree.
And also they just keep constantly respawning the corridors and things, and it does.
It's really not worth, like those ghosts in particular they don't really give you anything. They're just kind of there to spook you and annoy you more than anything else. And especially when it gets to that one point where like all the ghosts are like, the power goes out and it's just all the ghosts are chasing you around the mansion. 0 point in going for any of them, because you're just better to run and get out and just move. move. So yeah, those respawning ones was just like, yeah, I can't be bothered with these guys. They're kind of pointless. They don't really give me anything. They don't add to my like ghost count or whatever. So it felt very unnecessary to try and take them down. But again, like I think majority of the ghosts are just oriented so you don't have to angle your flashlight up or down. So that makes things a lot easier, and it means that like in the rooms where they do lock you in with a bunch of ghosts at once, it is a bit more tenable for you to kind of catch them and deal with it. So yeah, anything else with the controls that you found interesting or tricky?
So one thing that Dark Moon added that I remember being a big issue with the original Luigi's Mansion when I did play a bit of it before was the ability to dodge while you were sucking ghosts.
Right.
And going back to this, it's obviously not in the game, and it is a bit of one of my criticisms of Dark Moon, that even with the dodge, it felt like it was a lot of luck whether while you were sucking ghosts you would hit other ghosts and take damage.
Yeah.
And that's only made worse in this game, where say you're in a room full of ghosts and you're sucking one of the ghosts while another one's just randomly walking around the room, and then you randomly hit it.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's almost no skill in that. It's just bad luck because of the random direction the ghost has pulled you in.
Right.
I mean that's a minor thing.
Yeah, and it gets a bit worse actually, I think, because they have elements like the poison mushroom, which if it hits you will turn you tiny and then put you out of your vacuuming, or even the banana ghosts who just like they just throw bananas everywhere. And
so you're taking damage through sheer luck, which just feels not good.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely that element of it, but I think that is kind of the thing they wanted to get across was like the wrangling aspect of it. Like it kind of feels like Luigi's a cowboy to some extent with like a horse, you know? That's kind of the thing they're getting at here, is like he's wrangling these ghosts.
They don't want it to feel automatic the second you're sucking them.
Exactly. Like the challenge is using the analog stick to stay in the opposite direction, so you get like it pulls on it, because Luigi won't actually reduce the number on the ghost unless it is directly in the opposite direction that it's going in. So you have to readjust your stick constantly. And that's the other thing I think with the 3DS that makes it a bit tricky, is my thumb on the circle pad, constantly I would have to like readjust it because it kept like slipping off the side of it, especially in those tougher ghost fights when you're really just hanging it to one angle and you're like trying to move it at the same time. And yeah, the 3DS circle pad is a thing that I love, and I think it's such a cool idea, but it is a little bit finicky at points, and there are definitely games where I feel like it doesn't serve it as well, and in this case it can get a little bit tricky with that, and kind of like if you've got sweaty hands, like slipping off and being like, oh, I messed it up. So that can definitely be a little bit of an issue, but yeah.
But generally these complaints are fairly minor in the grand scheme of things, and I think about 80 to 90% of the time I think the controls were fine.
Yeah, exactly.
The job, and it is a fairly slow-paced exploration puzzle-based game, and there's just a little bit of action in there, I think, that doesn't take up too much time. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, and like taking down ghosts is pretty simple. Like you some of them you have little tricks to them that you have to figure out. It's obviously much more prevalent with the portrait ghosts because they are like puzzles in and of themselves, but you know, most of the time it's just like get a good flashlight on them, make sure that, you know, if you can get multiple at once so that then you can clear them out a bit more easily, and yeah, just kind of make sure that you're lucky and don't get hit by random shit, which sometimes is easy and sometimes is not. It just kind of luck of the draws as it goes. But yeah. Okay, well, in that case, like maybe talk about some of the things in the game in terms of its theming and everything. I think the idea of this individual mansion is great, and I kind of already mentioned that having that one space that you really get to know intimately is something that you don't have in the second game, and I think I understand more now why people are less a fan of that sequel, because it really is, despite the fact that you go back to those spaces again and again, each time you go back, they're slightly different. And like, there's different rooms you can access, and some things are locked off. Like, there's no sense of exploration and like finding your way around the place.
No.
Whereas this game does a much better job of that, despite its relative linearity. One of the things I wanted to bring up, which I don't know if was in the original, is this game is very clear about where you need to go next 99% of the time, because it has a map on the bottom screen, and every time you get a key, it will flash the door on the bottom screen that you need to use that key on. And I wonder if that's like a quality of life thing that they've changed for the 3DS version.
I'm pretty sure it is, because I really don't remember. I need to check, but I'm almost certain that there wasn't a clear map showing the use of keys in the same way.
Yeah.
I think there might have been a map when you paused, but it wasn't, here's literally a key dangling over the door you can now unlock.
Right,
sort of thing.
exactly. And so in this game, it makes it so much clearer. And instead of you running around every single door trying to see whether it works or not, you know exactly which one you need to go to. Which to some degree, people could argue takes away from the exploration. But I think there's enough non-linearity like later in the game when, especially when you're going back through to get booze and stuff.
I mean, there's still stuff where, regardless of knowing where the next key goes, I needed a guide just to like see, what am I meant to do here again? I'm missing this.
Yeah. There are a couple of things like that, for sure, that make it like, it's not specifically tied to getting the key. It's like doing something else specific that will open up an area or make it just, easier to get through. But yeah, how do you feel about the mansion overall? What do you think of it as a space to explore?
From like a mechanics perspective, the space is good. It's so I like that it's also neatly interwoven, and the start is very, very simple. It's like a very small corridor, and you go in like 2 rooms, and I think the 3rd room is then the boss, and that's that. And then it gets more and more complicated, and then by the end, it's almost like a full-on mini boss in each room before the final boss. And like it feels, it's got a nice ramp up to it that I think works well. Yeah,
and there are definitely elements of it that feel less unique. Like, I think the corridors, you can get a bit confused because they're on the 2nd floor and the 1st floor. There's a section where you're going like left and right on a corridor, and then there's a corridor that goes into the distance, so deeper into the mansion, and then you have a left and right from there, and that corridor looks almost identical on both floors. So
like the first and second floor,
so you can get confused about which floor you're on unless you really have the map to hand and kind of know where you are.
And it's not helped by the fact it's done by American floors and not British floors, where you have a ground floor and then the 1st floor.
Sure. So, yeah, that's another
so that
thing.
always confused me a bit more as well.
Yeah, definitely. That doesn't help. But in terms of like character and everything, I think that the mansion is really oozing with so much of that stuff.
Feels alive.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so much like ambience that goes on, from the lightning strikes that you see that kind of lights things up. And really, this is when people, were chatting about, Luigi as a character, because up until this point, the only defining feature of Luigi was like he's the one with the long legs that can jump higher in Mario 2. Like there wasn't a lot of stuff prior to Luigi's Mansion that defined him. Maybe Paper Mario to some degree, because Paper Mario had Luigi as a character in there. I think there's even a reference in Paper Mario to Luigi's Mansion, because I think they were developing it around the same time. And so in this game, you really get that sense of him as this terrified scaredy cat who is calling out for Mario nervously. One of my favorite things this game does is when he's about to open a door, the shaking of his hand as it reaches towards the doorknob is so good. It conveys so much character in such a small moment and really builds anticipation and the nervousness that he has.
We have an email about this exact
point. Let's talk about it.
Shall we get to that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Capsule J wrote in on Discord. One of the things I find interesting about Luigi's Mansion is that it reverses the roles of the player and player character compared to other survival horror games. Usually the character is bravely facing the situation like Leon in Resident Evil, and we the players are scared of the monsters. In Luigi's Mansion, the game isn't very scary to us, but Luigi himself is absolutely terrified. I also love the way Luigi nervously hums the game's theme song to himself in an attempt to break the tension in the quieter parts of the game.
Yeah, man, I love how he hums that. That's one of my favorite things. It's something that people talked about all the time, but what a great observation that, like, yes, the roles are completely reversed, because it isn't really a scary game. It is very cartoony. The ghosts are very much like, you know, they're nothing that are kind of horrific about them. They're kind of like googly eyed and everything. But Luigi is just so scared and he doesn't want to be there. Clearly just wants to leave, but he has to. He is bound to find his brother, and he has that loyalty to him. And I think it really just, throughout the game, you constantly get that sense. I think to some degree you do see him grow. Like I feel like he does get a bit braver at certain points in time.
I feel like it feels more emphasized at the start, maybe.
Yeah.
Those first few doors that he's going into, it feels like you're going so slowly, and like he's absolutely terrified, like you say. And I don't know, you're right, it does feel like it speeds up. He's more confident later in the game, or maybe that's just me as the player reading into him without meaning to.
All right, sometimes I would just skip the animation of opening a door because I'm like, okay, like I don't see this. I've seen it 100 times.
I mean, you see that animation a lot.
Just like putting the key in and opening it, which is neat. But yeah, I think that's definitely something that throughout the game you see, and I really appreciate that Nintendo make this a survival horror game for Luigi, but also to some degree there are elements of the survival nature of survival horror for the player, because I found myself in a lot of situations being like, oh shit, I'm on really low health, and I need to find a heart somewhere, because at the moment I'm going to be done if I'm not able to kind of find something and get myself out of the situation. The saving system is pretty, it works quite easily. Like usually there's a toad who you can find who you can save with. Sometimes they're not available, like certain missions, like when the power outage happens, you're not allowed to save and stuff like that. But most of the time it puts you back in a decent place if you do die. But I did die quite a few times in the game, not loads, but maybe 4 or 5, just because you constantly take damage, and as we talked about before, sometimes it's just randomness that I'll slip on a banana or a ghost will hit me.
Sometimes you just end up in a boss room with like half health.
Yes, exactly. Like sometimes it doesn't really necessarily set you up for success when it comes to that stuff. It doesn't provide you with the hearts that you need.
I returned a lot to the first boss room, like the baby's room, and in that playroom, like there's a drawer that always has a 50-point heart.
Oh, I see.
I kept returning there, and then running between there and Toad at the start, you can just save, heal, and then move on to the next thing. I did that quite a lot when I was quite low on health. And that was made easier by the fact that the mansion isn't crazy big, and you can always quickly make a quick dash to there and back. We have one more email about sort of Luigi and him being scared, and one other effect that was spotted that we've not talked about yet. Okay. Shall I get to that?
Yeah, sure.
So Masterclaw, or Justin C, actually wrote a whole review back in 2016 for Luigi's Mansion before the re-release even was a thing. And I just picked out this part from that review he wrote. While the core gameplay is pretty simple and straightforward, and in any other game might seem dull, Luigi's Mansion puts those extra special Nintendo touches on to create a charming and memorable experience. You know that extra large A button in the center of the controller's right handle? Its only function is to make Luigi call out for his missing sibling. As Luigi's health depletes, his bellows become increasingly shaky and desperate. This serves absolutely zero purpose, but is so amusing that the urge to press the button intermittently or constantly is inexorable.
Yeah, I didn't notice that, but that's such a cool thing.
I did notice this. Yeah, there was one point I was on like 20 health, and because I think it's the same, but I think it's the X button.
Yeah, maybe
to open drawers, and I just sort of used pressed X back, standing too far from the drawer I was trying to inspect, and it was just like this. I can't even do the impression of Luigi, but
Yeah.
it was just like this crazy. It was like crazy wobbly and like low voice, and Luigi's like slumped over his front, like lost all faith in the world, and it's really well done. I think it's a very, he's such a fully fleshed character in this game, and as you say, from a character that was just known for jumping a bit higher with a wobbly jump to like this full on scaredy cat, I guess. It's just really well done.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are so many little touches in the game as well. And you talked about like opening drawers and stuff. I love how tangible the world is, how you can interact with pretty much any piece of furniture and it will do something, like whether it be like a tablecloth that you can vacuum off or like a bookshelf that you can shake. There is always something to interact with in the environment, and it will sometimes give you money, sometimes it will find a secret like gem that gives you loads of cash, and oftentimes a lot of the booze, like the hidden booze, will be within the furniture, so you have to like run around the room. And you have the radar, obviously, which is another thing I wanted to know, because it seems like the 3DS version really takes quality of life to heart, and it really makes it so much more playable. I don't know if this boo radar existed in the original game, because it is such an easy, like well implemented feature that meant that any time I had cleared out a room, I always stayed in there and used the boo radar to find the boo and to kind of chase it around and to catch it and add it to the collection. Just because, like, as I was there, I was like, I might as well do this. It's kind of fun and to get the boos, and they behave very differently to ghosts because they are trying to constantly run away from you instead of towards you, and trying to capture them is a little bit different because you don't have a lock on them. Like, you kind of have to move Luigi like shuffling around to like keep your vacuum in that space, and then sometimes they'll escape and go to a separate room and you have to like chase them through to the other room and stuff like that.
Yeah, some of the later boos, once they're up to sort of 3, I think one even has like 400.
I think
HP.
300 is the max.
300 the max, and it's like, well, let's just, like, I was just going between rooms like 10 times, just trying to.
There is a bit of a tediousness to it for sure. It kind of reminds me of the is it Gamma Metroid fights in Samus Returns, where they go from room to room and you have to follow them for like 3 different rooms.
Yeah, I remember now.
Which kind of sucks. But
and there are a couple of points in the game where there are 2 points, I believe, where there are thresholds on the number of boos you need to continue.
Yes.
And I know you didn't reach this.
No. Well, the first one is like direct because you've just got your first boo, and it's like, okay, go find more boos, and so you have to go find 5 boos, I think it is.
In that case, I think there's like 3 thresholds.
Oh, really?
Anyway,
okay.
There's that initial one, and then there's 2 later, and both times later, I was like 2 boos short, and I was a bit like, right. Whatever. I'm glad I'm not more than 2 boos short. Like, that would be very frustrating.
Yeah, and I think it's a little misleading because it says that you have to collect 50 boos, and I was like, geez, are there even that many rooms in the mansion? But it turns out that it's kind of cheating because like 20 of those boos are in a boss fight.
Boolossus.
Yeah, Boolossus, what a name. So actually there's only around 30 that you need to actually collect in the mansion. And I finished the game with 47, so I basically got them all. Like, I only was missing 3. I just found out, because I was going to reopen my game file and like go through and finish it. You can't go back to the mansion after you finish the game, and it sucks.
Because you get that final price rating, I guess.
Yeah.
I got an F.
Yeah, so did I. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like,
I felt like I got so much money, and no, clearly not.
I feel like there were like maybe 3 rooms in the whole game that I didn't explore.
Yeah, but maybe it is one of those things that like you really have to take advantage of, like the golden mice and bats and stuff like that
makes
or maybe
sense,
you have to grind out or potentially like look in every single drawer. I wasn't looking in every single drawer, stuff like that to find as much bonus hidden treasure as possible. I thought I had a lot, but no, clearly that was just kind of the intended like casual path through that we did, and didn't really end up with a good mansion by the end. But
that's okay.
But yeah, it's like the ending of a game like that, when it's that minimalistic, isn't really a thing I really care about. No. If it was something more major, then maybe I would have gone for it.
Shall we move on to what I think we might agree is the best part of the game?
Okay, if you want to.
That is the portrait ghost.
Yeah.
Shall we kick off with Kevin's email and then have a discussion?
Sure, yeah, we can do that.
Sure. So Kevin S wrote in, and Kevin sort of described them as bosses. I'd say that they're sort of half bosses or mini bosses.
I would say, yeah, they're all kind of mini boss-esque. Yeah. A lot of them are not necessarily difficult. They're more about figuring out what the trick is and then, just executing on it.
So Kevin says, Luigi's Mansion was actually my very first GameCube game I ever got. I wanted the GameCube for Mario Sunshine, but my mum ended up picking this up as well. Shoutouts to my mum for being the greatest. This game, to my 9-year-old self, felt like a genuine horror game. The ambience and tone with the darkness, lightning, cracking, and soft sounds all make for a brilliant atmosphere that I feel holds up even to this day. There are 2 specific parts of the game that make it very special to me. First, the bosses. This is what I missed from Luigi's Mansion 2. There only seemed to be generic ghosts, at least from what I played. But in the first game, there were so many bosses with charming, unique personalities. The memories are still so vivid, even after not having played the game in over a decade. My other favourite part of the game is the secrets. There are an incredible amount of secrets in the game, from the optional Boo Ghosts to everything with the currency system that gets you an awful mansion to a legendary mansion at the end of the game, specifically the plant watering and all the hidden treasure, to the piano with the old school Mario theme and another secret area that completely breaks the game. If you haven't seen it, I recommend looking it up. It's this doorway in some random part of the mansion that leads out to space. You go out this magical staircase and it serves no real purpose, but it just resonated so much for me as a kid because it had that moment of wow, I never would have expected that this place feels so unbelievable and awe-inspiring. I'm looking forward to the third game on the Switch tremendously.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in there. I think that when it comes to a lot of the optional stuff with, like, he talked about watering plants and stuff, I remember there was one part of the game, like with the doghouse outside where you're watering something. Maybe there's lots more of that stuff that we just completely missed, and so maybe that's where you get a lot of the treasure from, like a lot of the kind of secret stuff in there. But yeah, the portrait ghost, the one that he brings up is probably the most memorable one, is the piano ghost, who is
Melody.
Yeah, she is playing the Mario theme on the piano. And the thing I love about that room is you go into it and you press on one of the instruments and it starts playing, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to put down a note being like, oh yeah, I walked into this room, there was a saxophone playing the Mario theme, and then I start walking around again and I'm like, oh wait, all these instruments start coming in individually with their individual parts for the theme, and then you go over and she's there playing it on the piano. It's like this full medley almost that's going on, and then she asks you a trivia question. She's like, what game did this theme come from? And I was like, I know that's Mario 3, and I got it right, which I was very proud of. But yeah, stuff like that is just very unique and different. And the thing that strikes me about the portrait ghosts is they are so non-Nintendo. You look at the way that they are rendered,
dead eyes.
Yeah, the dead eyes, the way they're rendered, the character design on those guys is not Nintendo in its kind of just aesthetic. It looks very different and off kilter and very weird, down to even the major boss fights, like the baby, the first boss fight with a giant baby, and does not.
It's haunting.
It is haunting, yeah, and it does not look like something Nintendo would make. Which is it. The thing I compare it to is the NPCs in New Donk City in Mario Odyssey. It's like this thing that shouldn't really belong in a Mario game, and yet kind of works with the thing that the game is going for. You couldn't imagine New Donk City any other way now that we've seen it, and I feel like the portrait ghosts are the same, where they are so different from what you would expect. And I think Luigi's Mansion 2 goes back to more traditional Nintendo-style enemies and bosses overall, as a whole, whereas this game was quite different. It's interesting because the YouTuber Arlo, he loves the original Luigi's Mansion, is not as big a fan of the second one, and he's done a video on it where he talks about how different Luigi's Mansion looks, and the original game looks very different, I think, to the 3D remake. The 3DS remake looks much more similar to Dark Moon in terms of its art design. Whereas you look at the original Luigi's Mansion, and its art design is actually very different and very weird and not super in keeping with traditional Mario aesthetics.
One cool thing about the portrait ghosts, which I hadn't realized till I read some stuff online after I beat the game, there are a number of actual portraits in the mansion, and these portraits are I don't know if these were added for the 3DS version, but they are portraits of the portrait ghosts before they died.
Oh wow!
And there's like a bunch of them that all match up, and it's just that extra level of weird and horror. And I mean, it's difficult to go away from the kind of Haunted Mansion Disney trope that I guess Disney built up back in, I don't know, 70s, 80s. And that feels very inspired from that. It's that like kind of dark, actually, while it's kiddie, there is still like this darkness, and like they're not running away from the idea of death in a way that you would think normally a kid's game would. It kind of would avoid the subject. It's just saying, no, they're ghosts. They died. Like, these are their portraits of when they were alive. Yeah. Now you have to face them when they're ghosts, and that's that.
No, this is very cool.
It's bold.
It is, yeah. I didn't know that. That's a very interesting thing. The other thing that Kevin mentions, the room with like the space and stuff. Yeah. I think that's actually a necessary part of the game, unless I'm wrong.
It certainly is in this version. I thought it was in the first version as well, but yeah, as you say, like it's one of, I think that's how you get the star.
Right. So there are 5 Mario items in the game that you have to collect.
That's one of the best bits, actually. Those. Yeah. The room that Kevin's talking about, but also just collecting the 5 Mario items. I actually didn't have to struggle for any of them. I just naturally...
No, they are generally natural. One of them's a bit just like, it's just in a box outside in the courtyard at the back. Like it's just, you have to press on the like bird hut or whatever it is, and it just falls out. But most of them you get from rooms where you defeat boos or bosses in, or not or portrait ghosts, or like just regular enemies in. And then that one is very interesting because you have to get a direct hit on the moon in order for it to appear.
That's cool.
And I had such a hard time doing this. I don't know about you, but I was just like, God, my aim is like just
4th
off.
or 5th time, I think.
Right, because it's like it's very weird angle you have to get it to go at, and just lining it up can be a little bit awkward. I was just sitting there for literally like 15 minutes just trying to hit this fucking... Yeah, it was bad. I was like, I had to look up online. It's like, is this what I'm supposed to do? Because I wasn't sure. And like, sure enough, I just had to hit it direct shot on the moon, but I just kept failing it again and again, and I was like, God, I'm an idiot. So yeah, that stuff is neat, and the idea that you go to the fortune teller and then she like tells you all this stuff about it, and kind of has a lot of references in there, and then finally when you show her all the items, then you can finish her off, and I think she gives you a key that is needed to progress. So I guess it is a necessary part of the game, which is one of those moments where it's not necessarily about like key to the next door. It's about figuring out, oh, I need to get all these Mario items so that I can get the next piece that will lead me to the next part of the mansion.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely an interesting part of the game there. We haven't really talked much about Egad. Egad's an interesting character who I think has become part of the Mario canon because he was in Sunshine as well, because he designed Flood. He's not in Sunshine, is he? But like he's referenced there.
I think you see him very briefly.
Right.
It's nothing like the amount you see him in Luigi's Mansion, obviously.
Yeah. So Egad, like, he obviously designs the vacuum cleaner, and he's like very much pushing Luigi to go into the mansion. And at the end of each like section, he kind of like warps you back to his area, and he has the machine where he turns the ghosts into portraits that you can then go look at in the gallery. I don't know if you went to the gallery too much to kind of look at that stuff.
Yeah, I did a little bit. It's quite a big area. That whole gallery, and I really enjoyed the animation of the machine and the theme tune that would play when they're transforming,
and then like they reverse it at the end with Mario.
At the end, right, for Mario. That's cool.
But Egad's cool, and one of the things that I thought was interesting is, I don't know if this was in the original game, but obviously they added this co-op thing for 3DS.
Yeah,
and like Luigi. So Luigi he's come from the future, and you get a message from Egad from the future, and he's straight up Doc Brown from Back to the Future. He's like, Luigi, my boy. And I'm like, you're literally just taking this from Back to the Future. The idea is that he's being sent Luigi back in time. Like, clearly they're riffing on that. So I thought I wonder if that is in the original game, but then I was like, well, this Luigi thing wasn't in the original game, so they must have added it now in the localization. So I just thought that was a neat nod to Back to the Future. But yeah, I just found that kind of funny that was in there. Yeah, EGAT doesn't really do too much. Like, he's obviously constantly on the phone to you or through the Game Boy Horror, which is another one of those weird things that I kept forgetting about in the game, is the Game Boy Horror, and like the necessity to scan it for portrait ghosts to kind of figure out their weakness, or like give you a bit of a hint, which I thought was a neat thing, because sometimes you do go into one of those fights and you're like, what am I actually supposed to do here? It's like, it's not...
I think that is a new thing, isn't it?
No, I think the Game Boy Horror existed in the game before, but definitely... I don't know, maybe some of the stuff about it is changed, but like the heart, like seeing the heart of the ghost and then figuring out like what you need to do to get them is like the butler, right? Because he talks about fire and hating fire, and you have to get him into that room by like lighting his torches. That took me a
few times. I like the animation wouldn't work, or for some reason I was doing something wrong, and I had to let him come a few times all the way down the corridor.
Oh man,
into the room.
Really? Okay.
It's cool though.
Yeah, and definitely that Game Boy Horror stuff was helpful in situations where, like, there was one where you fall down into this treasure room and there's like gold everywhere, and it's like, okay, I fell down in here. It's after you do you go to the roof and then you kind of go down one of the chimneys, and I'm like, I don't know how I get out of here, but I was like, oh, wait a second, I'm gonna use this Game Boy thingy on the mirror, and like using it on the mirror made me walk through the mirror back to where I was supposed to be. But there's other moments like the doghouse outside, and clearly there's something there, because in his entrance to the kennel there's like shining stuff on the floor, and I'm watering it with the water power up, I'm sucking on it, I'm like trying everything, nothing is happening. I'm like, what the fuck am I supposed to do? And I look it up online and it's like, oh, point the Game Boy Horror at it, and I'm like, well, no, that's not very clear. I don't know, that was one of those moments where I was like, I mean, I don't know why I would point the Game Boy Horror at this dog's kennel, but sure, I guess that's the thing I have to do. So yeah, to some degree, some of that stuff is not as clear as it can be.
Yeah, I was kind of, because that's fairly early on in the game. It is, like
yeah.
First, third maybe, and I was still using the Game Boy Horror quite a lot at that point, so I just kind of thought, all right, let's look at it from this perspective. And but I definitely started using it less throughout the game. While we're on like portrait ghosts and things, one of my favorite portrait ghosts, and I thought this looked incredible in the 3D, was the guy who's playing snooker on the snooker table, like pool table. I just thought some of that stuff, and like the old granny where you have to fling something at her, like her. Oh,
the balls that she's knitting, yeah.
The balls, those, the pool balls and the balls of the
yarn,
wool yarn look really good.
Yeah, there's lots of that stuff in this game of like sucking up a round object and firing it. Like that's like a mechanic that's used multiple times in boss fights and in like portrait ghost fights. And that, I think some of that stuff is a bit tricky because of the like angling, of where it should shoot at, which I think is a particular problem in the final boss fight, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I think I like the idea of it, but I think the controls hinder it to some degree. Just make it a little bit more tricky to pull off. One of my favorite portrait ghosts is the guy who's working out, who's like doing push-ups and everything. I just like it because the way that you get him is by knocking the bag into him, like knocking the punching bag into his body. And I was like, oh, that's cool, like using the environment against him in a really neat way. That's one of my favorites.
And then seeing, like, working out how the heart reveals itself and then sucking the heart, and that's how you get rid of them. Like, it's kind of shocking when you step back and think, like, that's such a big part of Luigi's Mansion 1, and then they're all gone in Dark Moon. It's like it feels like maybe a strange decision that took a lot of the soul out of what this game was trying to go for.
Definitely, because they're all so unique, you know, like from the giant fat guy who is eating all his food. That one in particular took me a little while to figure out, because it's around the time where you get the fire power up, and so you're trying to figure out, like, should I use that in conjunction with something else, or what am I supposed to do? But you're supposed to like suck up all of the ghosts who are serving him food so that he can't get food anymore.
Then he gets annoyed and his heart appears.
Well, then he starts firing fire at you. and you're like, what the fuck am I like? And I'm just running around like as he's just like firing these fireballs at me, and I'm like, Jesus, what am I supposed to do here? So that, and I thought, like, do I need the water power up here to like get past that? But no, I can't remember actually what you do after that point to get him, but it wasn't to do with those power ups. Which maybe we can talk about those a little bit, because I thought they were a really neat addition that really varied up some of the puzzle mechanics. You know, having the ability to, you know, freeze something. Like there's the ghost who is in the bathtub, and you like use or it's either fire or ice on it to make it like hot or cold to get them out, or to get them revealed. Yeah. So that stuff I liked, and there are definitely like fights where you utilized it. Where it wasn't great, I think the giant Boolossus fight that we've mentioned, where you have to use the ice to freeze the boos to suck them up. Again, the controls were the sticking point for me there, where it's like very tricky to get them to work properly. And especially the very final ghost in that fight just does not want to get close to you. Is so, like I got completely lucky with that, because I just randomly somehow iced him, and it didn't look like I had at all. But I did, and just finally finished it. But yeah, that one was a little bit.
They purposely made that last ghost just ridiculously
He's a
annoying.
He's a massive dick.
Oh, was really annoying. Shall we move on to some of the other enemies in the game?
Yeah. So, like, general ghosts overall are like your standard purple one or your standard white one. There are a lot of different varieties.
Like more than Dark Moon again. Like the variety in this game, separate to all the portrait ghosts we've just been describing. I feel like there's a good 3-4 more standard ghosts versus I think there's like 3 or 4 total in Dark Moon.
I don't know. There might be more in Dark Moon, but I think the way that it's paced out in this game is a lot better. You know, just
definitely.
Kind of having them all in a short space of time. Like you're constantly introduced to new things, and I think that's what keeps it up.
And that pacing's probably helped by the portrait ghosts.
Definitely, yeah. So you have those which are like more puzzly, whereas the other ones are more like not skill based, but to some degree, yes. Like they are more just raw, flash them, suck them, kind of nonsense, where you're stuck in a room and you're like, and there's some really tricky rooms, right, where they do some neat things, like the mirror room where you can't see them, but you have to use the mirror to get them.
Cool, yeah, I like
and
that.
That one was tricky because it's inverted, so like what you're seeing in the mirror is not because the mirror is a different like perspective, you're like in the opposite direction of where they come in the mirror. That was hard.
There's the artist near the end of the game where he's got like a series of paintings, and it's essentially just
that's like the big final challenge of ghosts before the end.
It's a big old boss rush kind of thing. It's
like 3 of each type of ghost in the mansion.
That's kind of hard.
Yeah, especially when you have the DK banana ghosts who like just chuck them all over the place, and you're like, oh god, I need to get these guys. They're just in my way. Bit of a nightmare. Like some of them are more annoying than others. They're the ones that grab onto you and will
they're
not let go. There are like your standard ones, which are generally quite easy. The purple ones, which have like a punch to them that kind of goes through.
Ice purple ones as well, ice blue ones, I guess, and you have to ice them and then.
They do, and they do vary that up as well as like having the ones that are affected by the specific element that you're wielding, like whether it be ice or whether it be fire. And I think it's interesting because all of those are governed by using the torch and the vacuum. And I think the difference there between the bosses, which I noticed, is you never use the torch in the boss fights. The big boss fights, the torch is not something that you need, which I found weird to some degree, where the torch had been such a constant throughout the game, where like it is... You get them into a staggered state and then you get them with the vacuum. Whereas every boss fight, it's nothing like that at all. Like the giant baby, all you need to do is like whack him with the bouncy ball, and then you just like
sucking up something, firing it. Like I think all 4 boss fights are like that.
Yeah, they are, right? Because the second one is the graveyard, like weird, like purple guy who you suck up the like evil dark versions into a giant ball and shoot that. The Boo is different because the Boo, you ice them and then suck them up. But yeah, the final Bowser fight is, or King Boo, we should say, you are sucking up giant spike balls and firing them. So you're right. Yeah, that mechanic. Yeah. And I think that's maybe why I don't like the boss fights in this game that much, is because so much of them rely on that finicky aiming with the...
Yeah, I mean, it's nice that all the boss fights are done in a big boss room,
right?
A big boss
yeah,
space.
It's like separated, because when you get to the baby room, like it's in a tiny crib, and then it like blows up into this giant thing.
Which is cool, yeah. But I do agree to some extent that it's a good example where the controls just aren't quite slick enough for what the game's asking you to do. It's just quite clunky.
Yeah, it's just like... It's one of those parts where, especially with Bowser, and he has so many moves that do so much damage to you, that like getting the right timing on it so that you are like, okay, I've got it, and then I've aimed right at the exact angle as he's sucking it up so it goes inside. Like, it's tricky to get that, especially with the fire, which like starts setting them off early. And yeah, and I thought also the suction on those ones in particular, was the spiked balls, was really hard to nail down. You had to be really close to them.
Yeah, and if you just got an inch off, the spike ball would just roll through you and do damage you.
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
Nope, didn't want that to happen. I wanted to pick it up and throw it back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the boss designs generally are pretty nice. I think the idea that there's this...
They're cool ideas, all of them.
Bowser body with King Boo in it at the end is awesome. And
and again, go on, you're going to say that.
So I was just going to say that, like, Bowser's head flying off, I mean, obviously it's a robot.
It's a mechanical Bowser, yeah.
Yeah, mechanical Bowser, but... For Nintendo to take one of their biggest characters in Bowser and then just have headless versions of him in a game is... quite a step, right? It's kind of shocking.
Yeah, and in a way. I haven't seen The Exorcist, but I know that like one of the things in that movie is like a head like twisting around, and I feel like that when Bowser gets into his final kind of stage, like his head goes on backwards, and it feels like that is maybe a subtle nod to that stuff, which is a little bit creepy. Yeah, that's definitely something that I think they are kind of cribbing from to some degree. So yeah, there's really some neat stuff when it comes to the design there, and I think definitely the giant Boo one is probably the weakest from a design perspective. It's just like turn it into small Boos and then just ice them and suck them up. It's the kind of design that I'm not like. One of my least favorite bosses in the Wind Waker is the giant fucking guy with the lantern who turns into
with a big ghost with all the mini
who turns into tiny ones. You have to kill the tiny ones. It's probably my least favorite boss mechanic, and Nintendo like to do it a lot. They do it in quite a few of their boss fights. The Link to the Past one, where you have to pull off the eye. This is the giant eyeball one. Where you have to pull those off, and I think they repeat it.
My least favorite boss mechanic, and I was thinking this playing Horizon actually, is when bosses minions that just spawn during boss fights.
Yeah, like ads, lots of ads.
Oh god, I hate that. And I was glad that Luigi's Mansion doesn't actually have that. When you're fighting a boss, you're fighting a boss. They don't just flood the stage with minions.
Right.
It's just I hate that.
Yeah. Just give you a bit of a focus instead, which is good. I think that stuff is overall cool. Like, there's not many bosses, and
there's 4 in the whole game.
Right, but again, like, I mean, Kevin even mentioned that he thinks the bosses, like Portrait Ghosts, are bosses in their own right. And if you think of it that way, then like, yeah, there's loads actually, and a lot of them are very, very cool and just really well thought out, and just well done. So in terms of other things in the game, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about? Stuff that you found was really cool? Any like neat moments and things like that?
Just that. I love that the game always feels rooted in the Mushroom Kingdom, and stuff like melody with the Nintendo music in there. There's always just that level of Nintendo polish and charm that grounds you back in that. Remember, you're in the Mushroom Kingdom, even though we are on this sort of horror trip together. And I love that throughout the game. I feel like the game never lost that. And little bit of Mario that you spot before the final act, and then essentially fighting Bowser at the end, I think are both really nice Nintendo nods that this game totally didn't have to have, but it decided was a fun idea.
Yeah. Definitely. It does feel rooted in that universe still, and yet still feels very different. Like, it feels like its own thing, and I'm so glad that they continued with it as an idea and as a series, because there's so much that you can do with it, you know? Like, it feels like Nintendo had it as almost a tech demo-y thing, but it is very fleshed out in a lot of other areas. Like, it is short and it is condensed, but I think that they have so much care and charm put into the game with so many like little elements. And I think, as I mentioned, just being able to interact with all the different parts, and I really like chasing the booze down, you know, like, and it was one of those things that I think this game in particular made a bit more easy, but like that stuff was fun. I like doing it, and there's lots of like little things that I thought were just neat puzzles. Like, there's this one room you go into, and you like get to kind of an end point. You're like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go, what I'm supposed to do. There's a mirror on the wall, and the mirror shows you that there's a switch on the other side of the wall. So you have to use the mirror to go to the other side of the wall and hit a switch that you can't see, because the perspective of the game is directly on, so you're never going to see that side, which I just thought was very clever, and a way to use perspective in this game that has such a fixed perspective, and yeah, it does that multiple times, like with the mirror room and things like that. It makes it very, very kind of does with limitations what you are supposed to do, which is use those limitations to create interesting scenarios, and I think that works well. I still don't really understand the point of the money, aside from getting the mansion at the end, because I kept expecting to spend money on something, you know, like, I'm collecting all this money.
I think it's a Resident Evil reference. I think Resident Evil 2, like, you collect money throughout the game, and it's a similar idea of getting a house or something. It's some reference to do with that. It's like a horror game thing, I think.
Yeah, maybe. But, like, I don't know. It feels like you're collecting all this money, and it feels really good. I love the feeling of sucking in all the dollars and the coins and everything. Right. Sounds great. Like, they have really good, you know, typical Nintendo has great sound design when it comes to, like, clattering coins and like dollars floating through the air, and it's great. Like, it's such satisfaction when you open up a chest of drawers and it's like bursting out with cash, but then you don't really do anything with it. Like, it just, like, it's almost more of a high score thing than anything else. Like, at end of the level, it's like, this is how much money you collected in this area, and it kind of leaves it like that, which to some degree is weird, because, like, the game does split itself up into sections, like areas, but the mansion is always fully explorable, or not fully explorable, but you can go back to places you've been to.
Right.
So it still maintains that cohesion. And the thing I really like about the mansion is, because it is so condensed, it's so easy to get around to where you need to. And I think one of the weaknesses is that it forces you to go through places a bit too many times. Like, the courtyard is my biggest bane, which in order to...
That was that lock we neither of us ever got.
No.
That was essentially a shortcut.
I don't know if that... does that exist? Is there a key for that door in the game? Because there is this shortcut area which, like, would allow you to bypass going through the courtyard to get to the next floor. But every time that you have to get to the second floor in order to go to that specific part, you have to go through the courtyard, through a back door, then upstairs, then around the corner, around up other stairs. And there's this one door where if you got the key for it, you could just unlock it and just bypass that entire stuff, which I thought was going to happen closer to the end of the game, so that, like, near the end, if I'm going back searching for booze, I don't have to worry about, you know, all that stuff. That's usually what Nintendo do in their games, with, like, you know, even in Skyward Sword with those overworld areas before dungeons, they'd have shortcuts where you'd roll down the log and you can then get up to that area. Like, that's Nintendo's game design generally is built around, okay, do this thing, then we'll give you a shortcut to make it easier to get back to it. And I never got the key for it, so I couldn't, and I think, I don't know why that was, but it happened. Any other moments that stuck out for you? I definitely think when the power goes out, that's a bit of a panic. It's like, like, I'm just being chased by ghosts everywhere. I just need to get there and get this sorted, because I don't like this feeling of because there is a certain...
It's a good horror game sort of feeling. Not that I've ever played a horror game, but like, it's what it's trying to evoke, and that's that's cool.
Yeah, it does give you that sense of the chase, of like running away from something that's too overwhelming for you to deal with. Because like a lot of the rooms, once you've cleared them out, the lights turn on and you feel safe. Like that is the mechanic of this game. Is like lights are on, okay, that's the signal. There's no ghosts left. That it's safe to stay there. And then all of a sudden the power goes out. There's no lights anywhere, and you're like, oh fuck, what do I do? So. Yeah, I wouldn't say that's like a favourite moment of mine because I didn't enjoy playing it as much. But I think that the effect was conveyed there. Like they wanted to convey that tension, and they do it quite well.
I mean, I knew where the power room was, and I just because I'd seen it earlier in the game. But had I been playing when I was 9 years old and I hadn't realised,
I would have quit the game at that point if I was that age.
I had to go. I mean, I would have been crapping myself. Like it would have been pretty scary.
Definitely.
And there's. Yeah, as you say, no safe haven at that point in the game. You just have to get from A to
and you
B.
can't even save with toads. It's like, what do I do?
Oh God, really?
Yeah. Because I tried to save with one of the toads because I hadn't saved in a while, and I was like, oh, now I'm stuck in this section. I don't want to do this section again if I accidentally die. So yeah, I was a bit worried about that, but yeah. Cool. Any other things that we have to say about the game? Like any gripes with it? Any things that you
just
felt?
that so much. I think we covered the gripes. It's mainly just the controls and that verticality.
Yeah, and some of the structural stuff in terms of backtracking can be like with the boos for you in particular. For me, it was fine because I was doing them as I went along. But
I don't like the gatekeeping with that sort of stuff. If it's optional, it's optional.
And we were discussing this before, but I tend to agree with you. I think this game does a really good job of making it as easy as possible to collect that stuff along the way. Like you can get it as you go. You don't have to go out of your way to find the boos. They will appear once you've cleared a room out. So like every time I cleared out a room, the lights are on. Okay, I'm looking at my radar. Where is that motherfucking boo? I'm getting that asshole. You know. So yeah, I think it does as good a job with that mechanic as you can do really in a game, which I appreciate.
And I just think there's some things that, like the portrait ghost, that didn't come back in Dark Moon, that and the more open world nature of the mansion, that would be welcome inclusions in Luigi's Mansion 3, which is later this year. Right.
I do hope they go back to a singular kind of thing, because it seemed much cooler to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just gives you a sense of freedom where Dark Moon was so linear in a way that, and the mission structure, while I kind of liked it at the start, but if you die at the end of a mission, you have to start the entire mission again. Like that was just weird pacing that this game is much better for. Like the pacing's just better generally.
Yeah. Is this us coming to the conclusion that we like this game more than Dark Moon? I don't know.
In a way.
Yeah.
In a way I do. In a way I honestly do. I think control-wise, Dark Moon's got a lot more going for it.
Yeah.
But if you could just iron... This game's got more charm. I think it's better paced. And for its short length, has an incredible variety in a way that Dark Moon felt quite repetitive, especially the range of ghosts by the end of that game. So you know what? Yeah, I prefer this game, I think.
Well,
I'll go for it.
I think I'm pretty close to saying the same. I think in terms of like puzzle design and stuff like that, I think there's some really good stuff in Dark Moon that I enjoyed quite a bit. But yeah, like there's so much character in this game. Like even to the fake doors, which when Luigi opens one, it just flattens him on the wall.
Even by the end of that game, I'd sometimes slip up and be like, "Oh yeah, it's just right, okay, right, I've just taken damage, fine, great."
But that's also one of those things that kind of doesn't have the surprise that it would have on the GameCube version, because you've got a map on the bottom screen the whole time, and the map tells you where the real doors are. Which there was another game recently that did something like that I know people were a bit annoyed about. That it's like, well, it takes away the whole surprise, you know, if you know where things are. But yeah, it's another one of those like kind of quality of life things that I appreciate. And the other thing I really like about the map is just it telling you the names of the rooms, so that you can like go through and be like, okay, where was the bathroom again? Like which floor was it on? Where was it? And so just quickly tapping them.
Right. It was because there was certain moments. Yeah, there were certain moments you needed. There was a specific. I can't remember what it was now, but I was like, it's to do with clothing, and I was like, oh, that'll be in the. There's like a a wardrobe room.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
And then you have to go back there. That's actually at the point where there's the power cut, and I went there before fixing the power cut stupidly.
Right. Okay.
But yeah,
and, cool. and that helps so much more once you've opened up most of the mansion, because at that point there are so many rooms that it is pretty tricky to keep track of exactly where they all are. So just having a quick reminder there to be like, oh right, this room's here, I can just go there directly.
Shall I read our final email?
Sure, yeah.
With just some overall thoughts on the game. So this is from Flapjackal, who has a bit of Player 2 syndrome, it seems. Luigi's Mansion is the first game I owned on GameCube. I finally got my own console at that point, so I wouldn't have to share with my older brother. Since he already had Sunshine, I went with the other Mario brother after having been Player 2 for so long. While I've never been good with scary things in any degree, I loved the game. It has the same weird Mario comedy I had come to expect due to Sunshine, and while there are some times I would get lost in that big house, the in-game guide character was helpful enough. Having Luigi get his story was a great idea, and the game was great along with it.
Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty nicely. Does EGAD give you help through the Game Boy Horror?
It's not EGAD, I believe. I believe Flapjackal's referring to the fortune teller who you can go to, and then she will say, "Oh, you need to do X or Y."
Oh, okay, yeah. Interesting. That's I mean, I feel like the Player 2, because you always played as Mario in every game, and I always was Luigi, probably, if Luigi was an option. Which is interesting, but I never really gravitated towards Luigi's Mansion at the time.
The game for all Player 2s.
It is, yeah, it really is. And yeah, I get why the reception to it at the time was kind of muted, and people were like, oh, this isn't Mario, I want Mario.
I mean, it is far from a 3D platformer.
Yes, no, it's absolutely not a 3D platformer. That's not what this game is in any sense. It's far more in a lot of ways, a point-and-click adventure game, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it has a lot of those sensibilities to it, whilst also being this kind of, much lighter take on the horror genre. And I think with time and perspective, I really appreciate Luigi's Mansion so much more these days than, I think people did back when it came out. Times have changed a lot, and I think that the brevity of it was something that really made it work for me. So
we finally did it, MBZ.
Yeah,
we beat a horror game.
We did. Wow, look at that.
I'm proud of myself.
We're real men now. Look at us.
Oh, yeah.
Resident Evil 4 up next, right? Right?
No. It's not happening.
I don't know. Like, the way people talk about Resident Evil 4, like it's one of the best games ever made, like the GameCube classic. I have watched like a good amount of Resident Evil 4, and it doesn't actually look that scary. I don't know.
Okay.
It feels like a game that I could potentially play. I'm
gonna psych myself up to play through The Last of Us on the easy later this year. That's my horror project.
That's fine. That's a good way to do it.
I'll stick to that. I'm not doing any Resident Evil for now.
No. Definitely not on my docket either. But I think about it from time to time of like, could I play through Resident Evil 4? Maybe. I don't know. If I turn off the sound. Potentially, but
then what's the
point? Yeah. No, very true. Great. I not much else to say. One of the things I have in my notes is Luigi's inner monologue, because there are moments when you point the Game Boy Horror at something, and it seems like Luigi is the one commenting on it, because it has like a little notation. So it feels like it is Luigi, like this is actual dialogue from Luigi.
Dialogue in his head.
And one of the ones that I wrote down was, "This inspires me to paint." So Luigi, maybe one day he will star in his own artistic game where he can paint. Luigi Paint, yeah, the sequel to Mario Paint. That's what I want. That should be my prediction for 2020. Luigi Paint coming to a Switch near you soon. That's a good prediction, I think. That's a good silly prediction. Luigi Paint. I like that one. So yeah. Fantastic. Well, I think that wraps us up for our 6th Backlog Club, Luigi's Mansion. That was great. I really enjoy talking about that game. It's really cool.
Thank you for voting for it, everyone.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Good pick.
I had to pay 30 quid for it, so fuck you for making me do that.
But
aside from that, it was great. I really enjoyed it. So excellent stuff. We'll probably have another Backlog Club in a few months. Be nice to get back into doing this a bit more regularly. And I don't know, Bally, we've been chatting about whether like the RPG is ready to
we
come back.
We have had an RPG break in
our
Backlog Club, and I know that they are popular for this sort of format, so we probably could and should go back to a few RPGs that we've not played before.
Yeah, so have a look out for that probably in the next few months or so. But yeah, that's going to close out the show for today. We have a few things to mention and chat about. Let's talk about our Patreon first of all, Bally.
Yeah, we just put out an episode of Patreon last week. It was, my brain's gone, a TNL Takes episode 8. We talked all about theme parks and our experiences with them. So if you want to support us on Patreon for $5 tier, I should say, you can have access to all our Patreon episodes. We're now up to about 16 episodes in total you can get for just $5. So if you want to go for that, would be much appreciated. And thank you to our two $10 tier patrons. They are, of course, my girlfriend Caroline and Atari Alex. And also thank you to our sponsorship level tier patron Daniel V. Thank you for all your support, and to all our other patrons as well, of course.
Mm-hmm. And you can find all that stuff over at patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. And we're actually going to give you a bit of a sneak peek at some of our Patreon stuff at the end of this show, just for people to have a listen to and be like, oh, if you like it, then you can go check it out. I think we're going to put up the first few minutes or so from our most recent TNL Ranks episode that was all about towns, video game towns and places that we really liked, our top 5s for those. So that'll stay tuned after the credits, after the music, to hear a bit of that at the end of the show, which could be fun if you have not heard that before. Cool. What else do we need to talk about, Bally, before we go? We've got to talk about our email address. Where can people send emails to, like they did for this fantastic Backlog Club?
Our email address is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Send us in your questions on any, news topics or...
Yeah, we haven't had some in a while, so need to fill that inbox up again with some new stuff.
That'd be great.
So yeah, please send those in. You can also pop those over to our Discord, and you can get those links in the description of the show, in the show notes. You can find us in various places. We are available on Twitter. You can follow us at TNL Podcast, and that gives you up-to-date stuff on what's going on with Patreon, with what's going on with new episodes, has a link to our YouTube channel and everything else. And you can also find me. You can find me at LordNBZ. Just tweeting about things here and there. It's Twitter. Sometimes I'm active, sometimes I'm not. It's just sometimes, you're working, you don't have access to Twitter because your work blocks it, and that's the thing.
Oh, jeez, that is...
So yeah.
1984.
No, I know. Bally, where can people find you on the internet?
I am at Ballyman91 on Twitter. That's BALLYMN91. I mean, I've been tweeting all my unpopular Mario opinions.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Fun thing going on.
Oh, it is, yeah. My God, we do have some very unpopular Mario opinions.
Oh, yeah, it's my favorite topic. And there was unpopular Switch opinions, and I saw one person say that the Joy-Con grip feels better than a Pro Controller, and I was like, wow, that's a take. That is an unpopular opinion.
Here's my hot Switch take. The gamepad is better than the Switch.
No, there's just no way. No. In terms of what?
I don't know. I just like to say the gamepad's my favourite thing because I love the gamepad.
The gamepad's great.
It is great.
I played like 40 hours of Earthbound on that.
I know,
thing.
it's brilliant.
I love it.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, send us all your unpopular opinions to our email address if you want to. Yes, you can find us in various places. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher. People are asking about Google Podcasts again. I continue to say they're not available in our country. Why? Oh, why are they not available in our country?
What other podcasting apps are we available on NBZ?
I mean, any one that you download, probably.
So we're on YouTube, we're on iTunes, and all other podcasting apps in between, as well as Stitcher.
We're on Pocket Cast, which is now a fucking garbage fire of an app, which I've
got Instacast. God. It's a good one.
Bally, I'm so fucking pissed off. This is maybe the most frustrated with a thing. Like, Pocket Cast is my life. Like, a good podcasting app is so important to me, it is unreal.
Yeah.
And they just pushed an update.
It's like the air that you breathe.
It is. And they push an update that nobody likes. I've been on the Pocket Cast subreddit, my friend, and people are fucking... They are fucking furious with what they have done to change change this
Try
app.
Instacast. I think you're the one who recommended me Instacast.
I think I was, but
now you've betrayed Instacast.
Well, I think Instacast was one that's available on like iOS. I don't think it's on Android.
Right. I think this was a good 4 years ago.
Yeah, it was ages ago.
Instacast.
Yeah. Which I don't know if it's on Android. I might just switch over because I'm furious. Like, how can you take something that is like perfectly designed? Pocket Cast is maybe the best podcast app I've ever used. It is so like it understands people who listen to podcasts. It knows what they want, how they want to listen to them, and then they just push this update that just ruins it and makes it a fucking garbage truck.
I use Instacast more than all the other apps on my phone combined.
There are some fun stats that you can get in podcasting apps.
Jesus.
It tells me the number of hours I've listened to podcasts since I think 2017, and it's something like, I don't know, a third of my life. So that's a thing. Spend a third of my life living, a third of it sleeping, and a third of it listening to podcasts. That's my life. That's how it goes.
Damn straight.
But yeah. Anyway, that's my rant about Pocket Casts and the fucking people who make it having no idea what their user base wants. But hey, that's companies for you. YouTube gets worse with every iteration. So do most things. So what are you going to do? Anyway. Well, there's a nice positive note to leave you on. Yeah. Hey, I enjoy talking about Luigi's Mansion. That's a great game. People should check it out if you haven't. And we'll be back a couple of weeks' time with some more video game chats and some more stuff to talk about and some more This Nintendo Life. So thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back very soon.
Enjoy this little bit of TNL takes.
Yeah, enjoy.
Ranks.
TNL ranks. There you go. All right.
That's the one.
See you guys later. Bye-bye.
My number 4 is Alchemoth from Xenoblade Chronicles.
Okay, yes.
So Xenoblade Chronicles I felt had to be on this list somewhere, and I sort of looked back at some of the towns and cities in that game, and I was like, it's got to be Alchemoth. That's the most memorable part. Because my memory for that game now, having played it quite a while ago, is not the best. Like I mean, a lot of it comes back to me when I look at stuff.
I think it's clouded because of the last 10 hours of you trying to finish the final boss.
That was tough and brutal and awful. But Alchemoth is like, I think the best adjective for Alchemoth is ethereal. It's just so it's so spectacular, like the water it sits over, and there's all these almost like high elf like structures. And I almost feel like if George Lucas had wanted the city of Theed on the Boo to be more impressive and less maybe traditional Italian European, he would have gone for something like Alchemoth. Like it's so sort of,
it is very Star Wars.
It's the most Star Wars location I can think of in Xenoblade Chronicles. And there's a lot of politics and power plays that go on when you're in that city, and it's kind of like it's almost like the first ending in the game to something.
Yeah, it feels like other JRPGs would end at that point.
Right.
Whereas this one is like, here's the halfway mark.
Exactly. And it is actually, you're a lot less than 2/3. You're right, it's about halfway. But it feels like the beginning of the end in that sense.
Right, and it's because Alchemoth is like, like the high end here are seen as the kind of most powerful race. They are the kind of, they live at the top of the Bionis. It is very much like the peak of your journey, like verticality wise, because you start down below the Bionis knee where Colony 9 is, and you slowly work your way up, like through the marshlands, through all these other places, through the village and the forest, and you finally get to Aerith Sea, which I think Alchemoth is great, but I think Aerith Sea is the more impressive part of that area because it's just this ridiculous expanse that I spent hours and hours just swimming across, as I've recounted before, just to fill out my map segments.
And Alchemoth's crazy because it feels like some of the corridors and things in those buildings are so long it takes minutes to just get from point A to B when you're on the inside of buildings.
Yeah, it is very like empty and open, and I think that befits its grandeur. Like it is, and I like that how you get into it is this giant like escalator that just continues to go up and up, and there's a very similar place with just a giant staircase in Xenoblade 2 actually that evokes some similar feelings. But yeah, it is very like episode 1 era Star Wars in that sense.
Absolutely.
Like the design and stuff.
It's just Xenoblade's so good at combining fantasy and sci-fi in a way that is in some ways similar to Star Wars, but I feel like it goes a lot further on the sci-fi end, and that's what kind of Alchemoth feels like. It's just so impressive, and like I mean, is it an audio format to try and describe some of these locations and towns is quite difficult, because some of them are just so spectacular you just have to check out like a video or a screenshot just to see like what we're talking about here. But Alchemoth is and it's also like it's kind of encased in a bubble almost. Like there is this kind of dome that is around it, and so you can kind of look out and see the rest of Aerith Sea before you. You can see all the different islands and locations, because a lot of the city and like how it is powered and stuff like that, I think is down to all these kind of stations that are out in the kind of... It's Aerith Sea below you, and sort of the prison island thing.
Prison island, which hangs like at the center.
Above, really cool.
Prison Island, not one of my favorite locations in terms of like wanting to stay there. It's a very dark, horrible place. But you know, it's cool, and I think that it definitely is like leaning into kind of elven like ideas, because the High Enti are basically the elves of Xenoblade.
Absolutely.
But kind of distinct in their own way. And yeah, a lot of plot stuff happens around this point in the game. So it's kind of like the peak of like the technological stuff that you see in terms of the Bionis, but it's also the peak of a lot of the storylines that you've been building to since the beginning of the game. And it's kind of the point where you close a certain chapter and you open a whole new one. You know, there's it kind of like finishes off one thing that you're on, and then it's like, okay, now this is the next thing we're going to be going after. So
my number 4, Alchemoth from Xenoblade Chronicles.
Well, we think very alike, Bally, because my number 4 is also from Xenoblade Chronicles. But it is my favourite location in the game, which is less to do with the village itself and more to do with the place. It's the Machina village, but it's really the Fallen Arm, which is just maybe one of my favourite places in video games generally. The thing that is so awesome about this location is that in the very opening cutscene of the game, you watch as these two titans are fighting against each other, and you see in that cutscene, it's not really referred to, but like the Mechonis chops off one of the Bionis' arms, and it like just falls in the sea. And that's one of those things. It's like, oh yeah, that just happened. Like the arm got chopped off, stuff like that. And then like, you know, the Mechonis like takes his sword and like slams it into the side of the Bionis, and you're like, okay, that's all cool and stuff. And the thing that I love about Xenoblade is that stuff matters, because not only is that sword that like gets jammed into the Bionis a location in and of itself, and you go there, it's like Sword Valley. It is a place where you can traverse from one place to the other, which is insane. But also the Fallen Arm, it's literally just an arm that is now lying in the ocean, and its palm is open, and the center of that palm is Machina Village. So like they've taken this thing that is very important to the start of the game, and yet is kind of this thrown away side thing that no one really thinks about, and then you fall from the top of you know, I think it's during Alchemoth and during that sequence where you kind of fall down to the Fallen Arm, and you realize like where you are, and it's like a holy shit moment of look at like these giant like not statues but
beings, entities.
No, the digits, like the fingers of the Fallen Arm. These enormous structures are the fingers, like are the digits of the Bionis, which is crazy. And like you go up to some of those locations and you just look out from that point and you can see it. You can see the scope of it. You can see actually what it looks like from above. And you can see Machina Village in the center, this tiny area at the very center of the palm. And it's a very cozy little village. It's tiny, it's circular. It's the first time you're getting to know the Machina, who are the people of the Mechonis. And it is a real surprise moment in that game that is so full of twists and exciting things. And it's interesting to kind of learn about their history and meet their leader, and the idea that like they have that ship there, and there's so much that goes on at that point in the game too. But I just think that location generally is so impressive, and the Machina village in particular is a very nice place. It is very much free of kind of combat. It's obviously the Fallen Arm has lots of enemies and stuff around it, but it's a cozy location, and I like my smaller town-like locations that you don't have to learn intricately and like go all the way around. So it's a very, very good place.
Just looking, there's another location somewhere near that location where you look back on the Fallen Arm. I think it's after you've been on the Fallen Arm, I believe. I can't remember. I'm just looking at the screenshot here. That's kind of.
I think probably when you're at the Menace, you can see it from there.
Yeah.
But that's one of my favorite things about Xenoblade is wherever you are, there's always something that you can see of where you're going. Like the Menace is always looming when you're on the Bionis leg, when you first like turn back out of that cave once you've been the goddamn fucking spider, and you go out and you see it's just like Ryan and Shulk are just like all inspired by it because it's just like standing there, and you can kind of look up and down from various locations, and it's like, yes, I will go there at some point. It's not in the same I will go there as open world games, but I do appreciate that they build in the visual design so that you can have a good idea of like, yes, this location does exist and I will probably be there at some point in time. But yeah, there are a lot of amazing locations in Xenoblade Chronicles. I think this is my favorite though overall, just in terms of theme and idea, and place. So the Machina village, but also really the Fallen Arm. So there you go, that's kind of my cheating going on there.
So my number 3 is